6:05 p.m. and I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Planning and Transportation Commission for March 9th, 2016. Robin, if you would please take the roll.
Commissioner Alchek. Present. Commissioner Downing. Chair Fine.
Present.
Vice Chair Gardias.
Present.
Commissioner Rosenblum.
Present.
Commissioner Tanaka.
Present.
Commissioner Waldfogel.
Present.
All present.
Excellent, thank you. Now is the time for oral communications where any member of the public may speak to a non-agendized item. Do we have any cards? None. Okay. I don't believe there are any agenda changes, so let's move on to the Assistant Director's report.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair and Planning Commissioners. Just a short report. We haven't had a lot of items at the City Council in the last couple of weeks, but we do have coming up on March 21st, the Stanford University representatives made a presentation to the Planning and Transportation Commission. They will do a similar presentation to the City Council. And there's also an action item on that agenda to see if the City Council is interested in having a comment letter submitted to the county for their consideration of that housing project. And then also, this commission also reviewed the what we call the sludge facility, and on Embarcadero, I believe it is. And the City Council is going to look at that also on March 21st as well. And then there's another action item dealing with the comp plan housing sites and programs that is scheduled for the 21st. And then we just got an email reminder that hopefully was transmitted to each of you this week about the AB 1234 ethics training. We encourage you to attend that. I believe it's on March 16th, a Wednesday, at 6 o'clock, I believe, in this chamber. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's no continued business, so let's get on to item number 1, which is an update on the TMA, and this is an opportunity for us as a commission to receive a report on the TMA from staff. The TMA was formally formed in January. It's an opportunity for us to ask questions and make comments. Staff, take it away.
Thank you. Good evening, commissioners. I feel like it's been too long since I've seen all of you, but I'm Jessica Sullivan. I'm the Transportation Planning Manager, and tonight we actually have 2 quick presentations for you. I am going to give, sort of from the staff perspective, an update on the activities of the TMA Steering Committee and the formation of the actual TMA Board, and sort of explain how that process has gone forward. And then I actually have with me tonight, I have Rob George, who is the chair of the board of the TMA, and Wendy Silvani, who's our de facto executive director. And so they will be giving a short presentation on the actual activity of the TMA that's planned for this calendar year. So that's the agenda I more or less just went over with you. We'll be doing 2 quick presentations. So the big thing in question here is how do we get people out of cars and reduce single occupant vehicle trips? I think you've heard a lot of our presentations about parking management and regulation in the downtown. And the TMA is of course focused on reducing SOV trips and providing programs that support people getting out of cars. But as you know, all of the programs you can see there on the slide, the RPP, the idea of starting to price parking technology, an expanded shuttle program, all of these programs will work together to help create the system that's going to support this goal. So the TMA is yet again another piece of that overall system. Quick background for those of you who might not have been around. In 2013, Council issued a colleagues memo and a study session to look at other TMAs in neighboring regions that were showing some great success stories. Google, Contra Costa Center, and Stanford all came and presented their TDM programs. And the council formally directed us to form a TMA in 2014, February. So quick highlights, TMA is a Transportation Management Association. Some of the benefits are that it really allows very nimble management of transportation programs. It can offer branded services and sort of a one-stop shop for communities, specifically employers and residents. And it also provides a forum outside of city government where the larger and smaller businesses can work together to develop solutions for transportation challenges. So in the last 12 months, we had a steering committee, which was a little bit of an ad hoc group of downtown businesses, residents, and sort of other interested parties. And throughout this 12-month process, a lot of work was done. A lot of education happened on what TMAs could do, what the Palo Alto TMA might look like. A very important commute survey was a sort of big milestone for us. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the results from that survey and how they informed the board formation. We talked a lot about potential goals and programs for the TMA, ultimately created a board, and then formally incorporated at the end of 2015. And that's where we are today. So what did we learn through that process? A quick snapshot of the commute survey. So for the first time, we actually took we did a comprehensive survey of the commute patterns for downtown Palo Alto. The area that you see there on the screen is basically the sort of physical boundary of the area that we collected data from. And what did we already know about single occupant vehicle trip rates? We know that Stanford Research Park has somewhere between 70 and 80% generally, depending on the company in question. San Mateo, the city of San Mateo, has about a 75% SOV rate, as does Santa Clara County as a whole. Google has about a 55% SOV rate, as well as downtown. We found out that the survey more or less put us in that range, 55 to 60% SOV rate. So it's actually pretty good compared to many other cities. And so the question is then, how do we take that 55% and make it less? We found that people who work downtown, 75% of them live in the Peninsula and the South Bay. So this is important information for us. And then we also found more information about the types of business sectors, including office R&D, retail, restaurants, services, and lodging. So a little bit closer look at where the employees are coming from. You can see that's kind of broken down there. 20% from the Peninsula, 33% from the South Bay, 22% actually from Palo Alto, and then a smaller percentage in East Bay and San Francisco. We found that people coming from San Francisco were likely to already be taking Caltrain or another transit mode, and that East Bay folks and South Bay folks were much more likely to drive. So this information started to tell us where do we want to focus our programs and how do we do that. So what else did we learn? Full-time workers drove 53% of the time, while part-time workers drove 75% of the time. And this was a big distinction because the retail, the hotel workers, the chefs that all serve our downtown in some ways are more constrained by the nature of their jobs and felt that they had to drive. Office workers, especially in the technology sector, were much less likely to drive. We also discovered that helping people with sort of hands-on trip planning assistance was a very valuable thing to do. The example here, the Epiphany Hotel, the TMA met with Epiphany Hotel employees, helped them get signed up for the Go Pass program, and also helped them personalize trip planning, which basically resulted in 37 more people on transit. And this was one meeting. So clearly there was a need there that could be met. So our high-level conclusions that really helped shape the formation of the board, looking at people who are parking downtown and using the garages, most likely to be government workers, meaning they work for the city of Palo Alto, hospitality workers or light office. Nearly half of them express an interest in seeking alternative transportation options. And the people who are most likely to seek those options have one of the following characteristics. They're going to be younger, so that means basically under 50. They're going to work for large companies. They live more than 10 miles from Palo Alto, and they have a flexible work schedule. And some of them have concerns about transit as being a real alternative. And that's kind of where we went and said, how do we help these people? So with that data, we started to think about, so what's this organization look like? We wanted it to be nimble, and the legal counsel that was hired by the steering committee also agreed with that. They said you should have 6 people to start with. You can change that as time goes on. But employers that have 100 or more employees comprise 70% of all the downtown employees. So involving larger companies seems to make sense because they have more ability to move the needle. They also have the greatest potential to help fund these types of programs, and that becomes very important, as you'll see. And based on the survey results, we know that larger employers have employees that are more likely to change behavior. And so just a little graphic there, we started thinking about 6 people, 3 representatives from large employers, 2 from medium-sized employers, and 1 from a small employer. So that configuration became the board that we have today. The chair of the board, Rob George, is here today, representing Phil's Coffee, the small employer. We have Bob McGrew from Palantir as the vice chair. Suzanne Mason represents the city of Palo Alto as a large employer in the downtown. Jonah Houston from IDEO is a medium-sized company. Lucy Tice from Google, representing another large employer. And Jeffrey Phillips from the Garden Court Hotel is a medium-sized employer. So that is the current composition of the board, and you will be hearing from Rob at this point about what the TMA has in store. One last thing, too, about funding sources. So we are in that sort of strange stage between sort of an idea and a real organization. We have funds in the existing consultant contract to help support project management of the TMA throughout the end of the year and probably into next year. So in lieu of hiring an executive director immediately, we're actually focusing on using that existing contract and focusing on launching programs more quickly. We do have board contributions, which are currently set at $10,000 for the large employer, $2,500 for the medium employer, and then $50 for the small employer. We have grants from some Palo Alto businesses and foundations, and we also have monies that were approved by City Council for spending this past year on TMA pilots. So those are our current buckets, and as you'll hear from Rob, we're looking at solidifying more of those funding streams later this year. Thank you.
Good evening. Push the red button. Perfect. Good evening. My name is Rob George, area leader for Phil's Coffee. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. It has been such a rewarding process to be a neighbor and part of the community of downtown Palo Alto. I have not only been involved in the TMA and the steering committee, but I've also been involved in the RPP committee. And so it's been a bit of a novice to this, but met Jessica about 3 years ago and was invited to participate in the RPP process, and that has become, I think, the catalyst for true interest that I've taken in the community and really connecting with business and residents in Palo Alto. I really think that there is a spirit of collaboration that we have yet to tap into, and I'm proud to be the first chair of the TMA. I have to say in this process, I come a bit naive, but I do believe that doing business in Palo Alto and living in Palo Alto are incredible sort of marks of distinction, and look forward to helping the TMA in its first couple of years. I'm going to grab the mouse here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through a report of the activities of really just a real rapid process since the formation of the TMA in early January. We've had a whopping 3 board meetings so far, and I feel like we've gotten off to a very rapid and impressive start with the support of business and neighbors in the residences. So this first slide is really just a brief overview of our mission statement. The greater mission statement is much larger, and we'd be glad to provide that for you if you'd like to see it. But really it emphasizes some of the points that Jessica made earlier in her presentation. But really our ultimate goal is reducing SOV trips into the core to continue to keep Palo Alto as a desirable destination to work and to live and really to dine and shop. We are looking to provide innovative solutions for both residents and folks that work and want to sort of hang out in the downtown core. And I think that the partnership of all 3 of those will create programs that you'll soon see are really headed in that direction. And we also want to be a real easy resource for the community, whether it be folks that work downtown or folks that live downtown, sort of a one-stop shop for
for transportation needs. I think that any of us that have hopped on a train or gotten behind the wheel of our car know that it's taking longer and longer to make shorter trips. Being a business person that supports stores in Southern California, I contrast what I experience down there when I'm there for business to this, and although much more desirable here, we don't want to head in that direction. The next couple of slides have a few milestones of sort of what we've worked on as a steering committee and then since the formation. So just some brief updates here. On the right side of this slide is a brochure that we've created that'll be distributed to sort of attract interest to the TMA and offer sort of that first step to the community in a sort of an old-fashioned way of handing out a trifold brochure with all of the options that we're planning. In terms of the steering committee, I think Jessica mentioned already that there were 12 or more of us throughout the year that had 10 meetings, really to learn, to gather information, and to really set us off on the right foot. Of course, one of the focal points of that was the mode split survey that happened mid-year last year, and even before the formation of the TMA, the mode split survey provided information that resulted in several companies downtown purchasing a large number of Go Passes for their employees, already moving the needle from that 55% SOV rate that we shared earlier. And then we did a lot of research. We had visitors from Scoop, Karma, Move, Lyft, and other transit organizations, really to just inform the group about options, what we may do to make this TMA relevant in a way that suited the Palo Alto community. And then the first website was published in the fall of last year, and we are actively working to make some updates so we present a fresh look to the website beginning April 1st. And then some date milestones. We were incorporated as a 501c3 in December, and then moved very quickly to form our board. We had our first meeting in late January and have since had 2 other meetings because we felt that it was critical to meet quickly, to make decisions quickly, and to show the community that we really wanted to, I think the word nimble was the word Jessica used, to be a nimble organization that got to work quickly. We have a contract with the Silicon Valley Community Foundation as our fiscal sponsor, which has allowed us to get on with the business of being in business more quickly. To date, or actually through February, with the help of some very passionate community members and business partners, we already have contributions of over $55,000 pledged to the TMA, and that doesn't count the funds that the city has generously approved for us for pilot programs. So as you can see, there's lots of interest already, even at a very early phase. We are going to be finalizing the initial programs, including the budget, at an upcoming meeting. We have a meeting at the end of next week, so it'll be our 4th meeting in less than 2 months. And then in April, our trial programs are slated to begin rolling out. So the next few slides are some information about the pilot programs that we're forming at this point, and we'll begin finalizing at our next board meetings. Essentially, back to the initial mandate by the council of reducing SOV trips to Palo Alto, we talked about what that would look like in real numbers. Every person that chooses to step onto public transit or to step into a car with a friend, it helps us with that. And we realistically believe that in the first days of the TMA, that we can reduce between 200 and 300 employees from that single drive into town. And there's 3 sort of buckets that we're going to focus on. One is transit subsidies, and my experience with with the RPP and some of the, let's say, conversations, the emotional conversations about the RPP program. Our transit subsidies are going to be focused on that to, again, build that bridge between residents and businesses. The second is a Scoop carpooling sponsorship. Coincidentally, Stanford Research Park is sort of moving in the same direction as we are, and we started conversations virtually at the same time with them. So it comes together nicely with our planning. And then a partnership with the Palo Alto Free Shuttle with some ideas about how we can make the shuttle more robust and possibly do some marketing and branding for the TMA so the residents and folks that work here can actually see the TMA moving down the street, so to speak, with the free shuttle. The bottom slide here is a little bit more about sort of some math on what does a 30% SOV reduction look like. So, talking about patterns for the employees downtown, we are looking at, moving a substantial number of folks from their cars into alternative methods of transportation into downtown. The reason that we're looking for 3 separate options is that the service worker, the employees, the team members that, are represented by my participation on this board oftentimes have very complex commutes that involve multiple trips a day. So we wanted to make sure that we took care of both the engineer and the waiter in this process. So the first pilot, in a little more detail, is the commuter transit subsidies. And here this slide really just gives you some information about the monthly costs of the passes that folks would have to purchase, and really looking at the out-of-pocket costs that employees would have to commit to really choosing to get out of their cars. And although these sound like reasonable numbers when we do the math about the cost of insuring and gas and things of that type, when you take into consideration the broad spectrum of workers downtown, we have to look for something that is rather robust to get those folks out of their cars. Oops, let me go back. One of the things that we've talked about in the transit subsidy area is specifically targeting in the pilot period the service worker or the low-wage permit of the RPP, and offering a 100% subsidized transit pass for those workers to get them out of their cars, to get them out of the habit of driving into Palo Alto and parking on the residential streets and into a bus, a train, or some other form of transportation. And we feel that this type of aggressive subsidy to kick off the program is a way to commit to the city that we're serious about reducing SOV usage, and to commit to the neighborhoods that we want them to retain their quality of life as well. The second pilot is the Scoop carpooling sponsorship. And this is, like I mentioned, will be launched in coordination with Stanford Research Park. On this, it's basically a $1 ride downtown for downtown employees. And in partnership with Scoop, we've added I think a very affordable line item to the budget that will be based on Scoop's research about their true research of how many people will adopt Scoop, how many people will choose to use Scoop as a ride-sharing service and take advantage of, instead of driving those short distances into downtown, possibly those 22% that we mentioned, that they will use a shared ride service such as Scoop to do that in a way that will save them significantly. And then the third sort of leg of the stool here would be the shuttle marketing. I think that we all see the free shuttle as a incredible value to the downtown community. We would like to sort of enhance that and make it a more viable transportation mode in downtown and through the neighborhoods. we had talked as far about rebranding. What if we could rebrand the shuttle to be, in partnership and representing the TMA, and folks would use the shuttle in the same way that students and staff at Stanford use Marguerite. And I think that, this is sort of a big sky idea for us, but the fact that we have a good relationship with the city and the willingness from the neighborhoods to clearly change people's behavior, I think that this is a clear opportunity for the TMA to, develop the partnership. These next few slides are some other activities that are sort of in the brainstorming process. Again, just to emphasize, we've had 3 meetings and they've been pretty busy, packed meetings. We are talking about a guaranteed ride program with Lyft and with Uber. Thanks, Wendy. We're also working at bulk transit programs for TMAs and other agencies. So, Caltrain and VTA and other Samtrans, and using those to purchase large groups of passes that we can pass on at even lower rates to folks that choose to participate. Of course, the second annual commute survey, and we're optimistic that we are going to see a number that will be lower than that 55% rate, just based on the enthusiasm during the steering committee phase of this. That will be another key thing coming mid-year. Of course, funding streams. The TMA can't exist without membership and participation from members and foundations that see value in this. And I think that that's going to be one of the important sort of foundational things that we're going to need to do to sustain the TMA for years to come. And then, of course, now we have the privilege of having Wendy supporting us, as she has throughout the steering committee process, but find a permanent executive director that will truly represent, all of the goals that we've decided on. This next slide is, and again, I'll emphasize that the budget has not been approved by the board at this point, but we wanted to put some real numbers up for you so you could get a grasp of sort of the work that we've been doing so far. So just a simple, revenues and expenses slide. You can see on the left that from memberships, we have over $35,000 already committed. We have an anonymous donor and some foundations that have contributed $30,000, and then the city's pilot funding of $100,000. So at this point, we are in the black prior to the budget being approved, with expenses of around $128,000 proposed and revenues at a little over $165,000. There's not a lot of detail here because, well, we're forming and the budget will be finalized and detail will be added. And that's all I have. Thanks very much. I appreciate your time this evening.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It's great to see the TMA get off to a good start, and I think your focus on implementing quick solutions is laudable, and we look forward to hearing more updates. I think we've got a couple public comments. Just do those.
So we have 2 speaker cards. The first is Adena Levin, followed by Robert Moss. You have 5 minutes.
Is that on? Great. Okay. So Adena Levin with Friends of Caltrain, which is a nonprofit supporting sustainable transportation on the Peninsula Corridor from San Francisco to San Jose, including Palo Alto. We've been involved in some of the early education and advocacy that contributed to Palo Alto going in this policy direction, and I was sitting in the advisory body as the TMA was being formed over the last year and change. And wanted to report on, this is a really exciting process. What Palo Alto is doing kind of on the vanguard. There are a number of other cities in this region that are following close behind. Palo Alto is going in this direction. San Mateo is, Menlo Park is, Redwood City is, San Jose is falling behind. This is part of an overall trend in this region for cities to take greater charge of their traffic and parking problems by pooling resources to bring to bear some of the successful trip reduction that so far we've seen from our large corporations, and democratizing that and bringing it to a greater diversity of participants. So I wanted to report on a couple of the exciting things in watching the TMA come together over the last year. So first of all, has been the process of watching it come together as I learned about transportation management associations from some of the experts in the field. Having a process of developing consensus amongst participants is really important, and that differs area by area. Places are different. So in our area, with a diversity of businesses and business sizes, including very small companies, retailers, restaurants, and so on, and medium-sized businesses, including some people who started out extremely skeptical, thinking, okay, everybody drives, my people need to drive, driving is the main thing that they're going to do, there's no way that's going to change, to saying, wow, we see from the data, we see from talking to our employees and thinking about these alternatives, that this is something that can happen, and it can be of benefit to the employees. And by the way, one of the things that Friends of Caltrain has recently done is, in partnership with a Stanford class, is provide some research getting at a level of detail further down, talking to individuals to help craft that first generation of pilot programs, supporting the broader quantitative survey. Which brings me to the other exciting thing is the level of knowledge that we now have about the opportunity to reduce those trips. So rewind 2 years ago, we had no idea how many people worked in downtown Palo Alto. We had no idea what the mode share was. We had no idea when people drive, why they drive, what kinds of things can help them get out of cars. And these are now things where there's a rich body of information that is now contributing to a program to be able to identify target market segments based on data and knowledge, and saying, okay, based on this target market segment, we can help this people get out of cars. This other target segment, this is something else that we can do to help get people out of cars, and be able to lather and rinse repeat to be able to continually reduce trips over time. Very exciting. So with all of that, also have some concerns about what's needed to take things to the next step, and to see continuous forward motion that builds on the emerging confidence amongst the participants and the community. And that has to do with making sure that there is a continuous ramp in funding, transitioning to stable funding sources. So TMAs can have different types of funding sources that are suitable for different areas. Downtown Palo Alto is not doing a ton of development, so development fees are not going to be a big part. It doesn't have a lot of huge corporations, so the $75,000 membership fee that you can do in North Bayshore is not going to be a fit to downtown Palo Alto. However, parking and parking pricing, it's really striking. The lowest cost transit pass is $66, and a parking pass is $42. If we reduced the subsidy for parking, and brought it even to the cost of a Caltrain parking, it would raise $3 million a year to run programs. Taxes may also be a way of spreading the cost around. So over the coming weeks, look forward to the discussion here at PTC and at Council to ensure a stable, continuous, a ramp up from moving forward quickly and having stable sources of funding. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Robert Moss. And you have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Flynn and Commissioners. Well, of course, traffic and parking are the two biggest issues in Palo Alto, and downtown is kind of the, let's say, the place that is most attractive outside of the research park to people who want to drive into town. Now, more than half the people do take transit right now, but we have to increase that. So how do we do it? It's a combination of carrots and sticks. The most effective way to get more people taking transit is to work with the organizations that have the most workers coming into town. That's the bigger companies. So I'd say we concentrate on companies that employ at least, let's say, 50 people. I'm not, that's just an arbitrary number. Maybe the right number is 25, maybe it's 100, but let's take 50. And we charge them a fee for parking for every worker that is going to come in and park downtown. So let's make some assumptions. Let's say that the 50-worker company has 25 workers who drive and 25 who take transit. So we charge them 25 times whatever the fee is. And let's, again, take some round numbers and say the fee is going to be $200 a month for everybody who drives to find them parking spaces. Another way of doing it is to make them buy a annual parking pass, which is $400+ per month for everybody who drives in. Okay, so now the company has a cost. Now, if the number of workers who go from driving to take transit goes down, the cost goes down. So now the company has an incentive to spend a certain amount of money, maybe $100 or $200, rather than the $400 they're paying for transit, in order to get the workers to take transit. So that would be one approach. Second approach, we don't have enough parking spaces downtown, and people are moving and parking, as you know, in residential neighborhoods. And this is creating some real problems. So we ask the workers who are parking in the residential neighborhoods to pay a fee. And how do you find out who the workers are and what the fees are? Well, everybody who parks has a parking license plate. So you go and check the license plates, and you find out who owns the car, and you find out where they work, and you contact them and you say, you are parking in a residential neighborhood, we're going to tag your car unless you pay a fee of X. Or we will cooperate with your employer and give you a transit pass if you'll take the bus or VTA. So we get a combination of funding sources. The city can put in some money because they're not going to have to pay money for garages or for traffic enforcement. The employer can pay some money because otherwise he's being charged a fee for having his employees drive to work. And the employee pays something because he's not going to be at risk, and he's going to have a place where he can get in and out of work without having to worry about finding a parking place. So you have all three entities working together to solve the problem. That's the best way of getting everybody involved and getting everybody realizing that there's A, a problem, and B, there's a way to solve it. And C, here's how we can do it. The other problem we've got is the transit system. VTA sucks on a good day, and they don't have very many good days. So we need to get our politicians giving us an adequate transit system. I have to drive down to City Hall because there has never been a bus system. For 30 years, there's never been a bus system that goes through Barron Park. We used to have one. When the city ran the bus system, we had transits that worked in the city, but no more. That was 30, 40 years ago. So we have to get on VTA's back and get them to give us a good local bus system, or worst case, the city puts in its own shuttles. We have to get VTA to do the job that they're supposed to do. The second is Caltrain. Caltrain doesn't have enough trains during midday and before and after the classic rush hour. so that people can take it. And a lot of people don't work 9 to 5. They work odd hours, and so they have a tough time taking transit because the transit doesn't accommodate odd hours. So we need to get both VTA and Caltrans on board, along with the city, the employers, and the workers.
Thank you, Mr. Moss.
Thank you to all of our speakers. I'd like to bring it back to the commission for any comments or questions. Let's do a first round of 5 minutes and just hit your lights. Commissioner Rosenblum.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the presentation and also for kicking this off. This is really exciting. I have a couple questions. The first, and of primary concern to me for longer term, is what do you consider to be the most likely long-term stable funding source? So we've heard proposals for using parking fees, heard proposals for essentially having a per head tax on businesses. There may be development fees, et cetera, but what do you see as the most likely major funding source for this going forward?
I'll take a shot at that one. I think if we were having this conversation in 2 or 3 months, we might have a better basis for answering that, because we are just starting, and clearly, you saw where the subsidies are coming from now. We don't know yet what, the future is going to bear. But we do know that, ultimately we are working on identifying those funding streams, and I think it's going to be, a question for the council as to how that kind of plays out. Parking revenue, I think everyone knows that, right now we're not charging for on-street parking. I think that's going to be something that happens in the very near future. Whether those revenues can be a long-term source of funding for not just parking, but TDM programs, I think is a big question for the community, because that is a great source of revenue in other communities, and they have done that in other places. So I would say we don't know yet, but we're looking at options, and I think we're hopeful that certainly by the middle of the year, we'll have some strong sense. Wendy wants to add something.
I can, is it okay? All right. I think that Jessica is absolutely right. What we're going to be focusing on in the next few months is launching programs and making adjustments as necessary. We want the programs to be informative. We want them to be well used. We want employees to start to really value them. Once we do that, we can then kind of make the case for continuing and more investment in what's working well. We can noodle with what we're not happy with. We're in a really good place for a few reasons. And I don't know, I think it's in your packet from our survey. It was very, very encouraging that 49% of the people said that they would like to consider an alternative. So that's pretty good. We're already at a 55% SOV rate, and of those who are still driving, almost half of them are at least interested and would like to try something. Pricing is really important. When you dig down and peel the layers back in the survey, one reason that the larger companies do a lot better with and have a 30% SOV rate versus smaller companies that are 60 and 70% is pricing. Right now, a big company can buy a Caltrain pass, and I hate to kind of get into the weeds, but $180 for the whole year per employee, and it's based on bulk, and it's based on a big waste factor and all of that. Nevertheless, the cost is so low, even if a few people are using it, there's a return on investment. Even if the tech companies or the big employers are charging their employees, that's $15 a month that it costs somebody who works for a big company to commute on Caltrain, regardless of how many zones they need. The poor person who works for the very small company who can't afford to buy bulk passes because their employer doesn't qualify for 84 passes, which is the minimum for the Go Pass program, is paying a minimum of $80 a month for a 1-zone pass and over $200 for a 4-zone pass. So one of the reasons that We've identified a commuter subsidy program that basically starts to level that playing field for people who work for smaller companies. His pricing is really important because right now it's more expensive to hop on Caltrain. And we actually have a list of the transit-friendly zip codes and cities that we know people are already using where transit works. So now the next step is for us to fold our program and really target the smaller employees into those. The third thing is that transit is becoming more reliable, so people are more willing to use it now than they were even a couple years ago. Suddenly, even though transit has its share of problems, most certainly, it is more competitive with driving in terms of total travel time now because driving has gotten so bad. And the last thing is there's a tremendous opportunity with the shuttle kind of reconfiguration and remarketing to make it a better alternative for people who work in live in East Palo Alto and other parts of Palo Alto, perhaps down to Barron Park, than it currently does. So I'm very optimistic that we can actually do a lot. And what we end up doing that really works well will drive where we're going to look for funding. We have funding from an anonymous foundation who's very excited about what we're doing. If we can prove that what we're doing on that very small scale is working, there could be all kinds of new revenue streams for us.
Thank you. So I have one more just quick follow-up.
If I could add just one simple comment to that as well,
Sure.
is just to zoom out, is I think to answer your question, the board formation was critical to have us thinking in that direction. So if you look at the membership of the board, it was really based on a group that were deep influencers in the region, innovative thinkers, and would bring a level of excitement that would inspire, and I know it's a very hopeful thought, but inspire contribution and funding of this for the future. I think that is a key piece. The one thing we don't want to have happen is our new executive director to be knocking on doors fundraising. So I think that it's something that we're talking about. It's very early phase, but revenue stream for the future is important. But I think that if you look at the group of representative, we have a heavy group of influencers in this area that can help us with that.
Yeah, and so with this in mind, just one quick comment. I think that the pilot program seems relatively unambitious compared to what I would love to be able to see. In particular, some of the major levers you're basing on really small, so 150 to 200 subsidized transit passes, for example, and which won't give you a very large sample if you're cutting it by different kinds of workers with different experiences, et cetera. I would love to be able to get more data back. And the city in particular, putting up $100,000, I feel is small. And so my comment there would be, we talk about things like the cost of building one parking place is $60,000. So the city is subsidizing, 1.5 parking places worth of funds for this experiment. And it feels paltry for what we're trying to do. So I would much rather see more substantial funds committed, particularly by the city, but by all parties probably, and get experiments that have some teeth that we could actually sit here after the conclusion of these experiments and see which ones really seem to work and we should get behind. To what extent did giving subsidized transit passes actually get people out of their cars? To what extent using a ride-sharing program like Scoop actually make a difference for people that live within 1 to 10 miles or 1 to 20 miles and start to cut it in different ways? So the comment on long-term funding, I'll take the point that it's too early to think about that, although I'd love to hear ideas later. But with regards to the experiment itself, it feels small. And so I'll stop at this point.
Thank you. The next slide I see is Commissioner Downing, and please hit your lights if you'd like to speak. I only see one right now.
So I really do have to echo the thoughts of Commissioner Rosenblum. The first thing I thought about when I looked at this proposal was, wow, that's it? That's all you guys are asking for, $100,000? I do think it's really small. I think that the council has spent more time on parking than it has on basically all other issues combined, almost, in the last year. It's very clear that it's the number one issue that people come to complain to council about. It's what they all ran on their election in the last 2 years. And so if this is as big of an issue as council has said it is, then it should put the money where it needs to be. And I think 100K is really small for that. I looked at the salary that you guys are offering this executive director, right? And I think you're saying 85 to 95K. So that's not even median income for Palo Alto. So this person, I don't know where they're going to live. So I would like to see a bigger request for monies, and I would like the council to grant that. I think this should be an ambitious project that tries to throw everything at the wall and sees what works, so that you don't just have one failure, you have some failures and some successes, and you have an idea of your direction for the future. And I obviously like all the pilot programs that you're offering. I think they're great, but I would also love to see a lot more time spent on getting paid parking in Palo Alto. I mean, that's literally money we're leaving on the table that should be going to fund the TMA. I would like to see the TMA also more involved with all the other transit agencies and trying to get these agencies to talk to each other, trying to get them to create schedules that align with each other, trying to create passes that work on more than one transit agency. And I know that those are lofty goals. I know that those are not simple things to do, but those are definitely things that for Palo Altans seem worthwhile to do and to spend time on. So yeah, that would be my ask. I wish you guys all the best of luck. I think this is a tremendous undertaking. It's a great thing to do. It's great for the city. If we can succeed in doing this in Palo Alto, then that's going to lead the light for all the cities that surround us. So with that, I do wish for the most success, and I hope that the council backs you as it should.
Can I respond to Commissioner Downing's comment? I think on the funding piece, I want to, and I'm not going to speak for the TMA, but in a way, they are operating under the assumption that we've got what we've got right now. Right now, we have $100,000 that's approved by the City Council for use in fiscal year 2016. So it goes away if we don't use it, essentially. We knew we had this budget. We were able to get $50,000 more from additional foundations and business support. I think we're certainly going to go back and ask for a lot more money. However, the position the board took was that they wanted to try something quickly that we could roll out with Clipper Card and see if we could move the needle. Because if we start trying to request money for programs and we don't know what's going to work, we just felt like that was the wrong message. So we wanted to try something small and nimble. And if you recall Rob's slide about how the low-income transit pass would be rolled out, it's targeting the 750 downtown RPP permit holders who are already parking in the neighborhoods. 750, that's a pretty big number when it comes to that 5,500 overall goal. So while we don't know if all 700 or even half of that will go for it, it has the potential to actually target a pretty big piece of the population. So I think, the feeling was this is actually a significant way to reach those people. If it doesn't work, then we would try something else.
If I could add one thing to that as well, is that thank you to the Commission's support on that, and I would encourage you to share those sentiments. I think our action was more about making sure that we secured and planned for these funds so we didn't lose them. And I think that was something that we have been discussing at the 3 meetings that we've had, is that how do we get out of the gates quickly, commit these funds in a way that show that we are about moving forward in action, and then the plans for the future are much greater. But the worst thing that could happen for the TMA at this point is for us to lose that pilot funding for $100,000.
Thank you. Commissioner Waldfogel.
Thank you. I would like to, I won't belabor it, but I agree with the public comments and my fellow commissioner comments about stable funding. So I think you have that message. Different topic, public process and accountability. In some ways, the TMA is a response to a couple of years of RPP work and about mitigating impacts on neighborhoods. And yet your board does not have any residents. You didn't speak to public process, whether your meetings are open, whether your processes are open. I think it's really important that we keep that in mind as the TMA proceeds, because we really have to reflect impacts on neighborhoods, improved quality of life in neighborhoods, and it has to be visible in a very public way. So just, do you have any comments about that?
Thank you for bringing attention to that. I think at our last meeting, one of the discussions was forming resident advisory committees, and even the possibility of adding a non-voting member to the board from a residential neighborhood near the downtown core to support us on that partnership and that community that we were talking about. It is something that we're discussing. There have been a lot of things on the agenda, and not to use that as an excuse, but this is something that we are feeling tremendous community support and want to bring them to the table as quickly as possible.
Great. Yeah, just keep that in mind, because this will be very visible. So let's just make sure the community knows what's going on.
And they are public meetings, and we plan on communicating the dates and times of those meetings through our website, so that will be available to the public.
Commissioner Tanaka.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for your guys' work on this, putting it together. I know it's something that you guys are probably volunteering for, so that's awesome. Thank you for your work. And in general, I actually think that this is a nice structure. I think it allows you guys to move quickly and experiment, which I think is great. One question I have for you is how do you measure the efficacy? So I know that you did kind of a survey, you got some basic data, but how are you going to measure how effective these programs are, and which one gives you the biggest bang for the buck? Have you guys given much thought about how that process is going to happen?
I'm going to defer to Wendy on that one.
Okay. Well, one of the things that we're looking at is in return for getting a free pass, we're going to be surveying the people who sign up for that. They'll be agreeing to give us some information about their habits. We'll be watching that, but we're also going to be watching their actual utilization. So one of the requirements, and this is modeled after other programs in the area, so it's not us recreating the wheel here, but one of the requirements is somebody has to say, yes, I will use this pass 3 days a week at least to get to work. And so at the end of the month, we will be reviewing their utilization of that pass. And if somebody hasn't used it the minimum, we are going to take those funds and give them the following month to somebody else rather than, so we're going to be monitoring every single month what the utilization is. We'll be able to look and see, okay, people who live in this area are doing really well, people who are over here, so what do we need to do over here to make it easier for people to use? And we're going to be learning as we go and tweaking the program accordingly. Okay, so that's why we have a phased rollout for it. And someone will be eligible for up to 6 months of the pass, which will give us a good learning curve.
Okay, well that's great, because I think that doing a series of rapid small experiments and then measuring like the return on investment to see which one's yielding the highest SOV rates, I think would be is a good plan. Because like for instance, I know right now you're kind of targeting kind of like the lower income for the free passes, but I've been also thinking, well, aren't they also likely to also take public transportation already? Because really what you want to do is you want to be impacting people that currently drive every day to work, and then suddenly you move them over to taking public transportation. So I think being very data driven, as it sounds like you're trying to do, is great. So I think that's keep it up. Thank you.
Commissioner Olczyk.
I'd like to. I agree with Commissioner Tucker. I like the process and the format and the way that we're approaching this, and I think that the data is extremely valuable, because this is one of those challenges that people bring a lot of anecdotal and sort of personal experience to their perspective, and I think it helps tremendously for us to really understand essentially what's going on and who's creating the problem. That said, I'm sort of curious to know how you feel the RPP process is creating potentially challenging pressures on this, on the goals that we're set, on this process. I'll give you an example. So we've instituted an RPP process, and I think most recently they determined some sort of phasing out in the neighborhoods of commercial permits. So sometime between now and, 6, 8, 10 years? 10 years. In 10 years' time, there'll be no parking there. And I guess my question is, to what extent is that essentially an unreasonable goal from the perspective of the goals of this process in creating a solution that it solves a very similar problem, right? Or the problem that we're trying to solve, I think, through this process affects those users.
Thanks, Commissioner Alchek. Let me see if I can understand where you're going with this. So I think we've always talked about the three-legged stool: parking management, transportation demand management, parking supply. RPP is pretty much the biggest parking regulation tool that we currently have in place. It highlights, yes, it brings a focus to the downtown worker who may have been parking in the neighborhood. That worker is also a prime candidate for services that the TMA will provide. So there is that connection. But I guess
my question is, do you think that we will solve the problem in time for the people who are going to have nowhere to park as a result of the pressure that the residential neighborhoods have placed on them?
So yes.
Yes. I mean, I wouldn't be sitting here accepted this position if I didn't believe that. I definitely feel that as a member of the RPP committee and the extreme amount of emotion that's been involved from residents and businesses regarding this, in an ideal world, the order could have come better. Is that it would have been nice to have paid parking in advance of RPP, and we could have gotten more relevant data in terms of the impact of that. But that is not the way that this is rolled out. So I think that one of the things that we realize is that these programs can work side by side. They may not be perfect. I can stamp my feet and say, 10% reduction in permits every year to 0 in 10 years is not realistic, but that's not going to build any sort of collaboration between residents and business. And I think we have to take a shot at this. And that's why I enjoy and am proud to participate in the TMA at this point.
It's created a listing.
Well, yeah.
People are, the RPP may not be perfect, but it's created a listening.
Yeah, and I think, if you've heard Wendy, the ears are wide open now, council, residents, and business. I think that one of the words that was used at the special council meeting a while back is, maintaining a vibrant downtown community. And I think there were a few people that were like, we don't like that word. But, ultimately, we want Palo Alto to sustain and flourish for, beyond the 10-year challenge of reducing RPP permits. And I think TMA, we're too late. But we're off with our plans. I think we're off to a good start. And I think that the key is that, residents and businesses can communicate and work on solutions together in a way that, we haven't even thought of yet. Do we have challenges? Yeah, yes. Funding is a challenge. If we don't have funding, the TMA stops existing. So I hear you. And if we don't have resident support, we won't exist either. So I think that, as a small business person here, I have to think through realistic lens. And I hope that the council, as it learns, will adapt and become more focused on, I'll say, a less political bent.
So, you mentioned a realistic lens, and I want to sort of follow up on that. when you envision the future, does it seem realistic to you that the public streets that are in walking distance of our downtown will be available for parking for non-residents? I guess what I'm trying to say is, to me, a part of this, we may be a little late, for sure. I also don't believe we're going to be dealing with the status quo in 10 years. I believe that the entire peninsula is going to grow dramatically over the next 10 years. So we're not only late, but it's going to be very difficult to catch up. And so I find the RPP program to be at odds with our TMA program, because it's setting up an unrealistic expectation that we will solve the parking problem in 10 years' time through a TMA without the use of the public streets. And so one of my concerns is that we're creating a pressure on ourselves to solve this problem at any cost, because we've created an expectation that the streets that are within walking distance of our downtown are fundamentally separate from the downtown and should therefore remain entirely residential. And so that's one of my concerns. And we can write the biggest check in the world, but I'm not entirely sure that that will solve that problem. And I wonder if there's a process by which this board can influence the RPP process and make sure that the path of the RPP process is informed based on all of the findings and experience that I assume we're going to have over the next few years. That's my concern.
Thank you. Vice Chair Gardias.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. George, so congratulations on your positions. So I'm happy to see you, and thank you very much for your service. There's a couple of items that I'd like to bring to your attention. So when we met last time with TMA a couple of months ago, I remember there was a conversation about 30% reduction in the SOV goal, and to my recollection, my colleagues were finding this 30% reduction not substantiated with the reasoning. We thought that that goal was not supported with any objective calculations. That's number one. And also I remember that within this 30% reduction, there were objectives of others. And then our recommendation was to make this goal realistic, or reduction realistic, and recalculate it so it would solely express performance of TMA, and also would mean something as opposed to just being a picked number from the sky, given that this 30% is widely circulated number and sounds impressive. But if somebody's going to look at this 2 years from now, and if that goal is not met, or it's we cannot substantiate any numbers against this 30%, where would it put us? So please just take a look at this 30% again, because I see it's on your slides, and I don't remember that it meets the comments that we expressed last time. I was happy to seeing from the other perspective. I was happy to seeing the number of the influential companies on your board, and then among others, Ideal. I mean, that's what they do for a living, right? So maybe just with the presence of Mr. Jonah Hudson, maybe they can just provide some other expertise to to your program. I would like to also bring your attention to the City Council revised goals. This year's revised city goals includes mobility this relates very nicely to TMA program. I think that when you think about this, you may want to somehow channel your objectives to align with this mobility expectation from the council. And then, if you ask me, I would say that the biggest pain is pretty much lack of collaboration among all these different agencies. And just a good example is City of Mountain View that spends tremendous effort on the transportation hub that's next to their train station. And you may go there, you may see that there are city buses, there are VTA buses, there are TMA buses, there are some yellow buses, pink buses, variety of buses, railway, and so forth. And if you go there and observe, you may see that number of those buses, they just leave with 1 or 2 people on board. And then just, this is not how you would like to work together. Right, so somewhere the cost is lost. Right, there's a huge expense, cost is lost, so it doesn't make sense. Probably if somebody was going just to take a look at this more diligently, would find out that those numerous buses, they cause more traffic than they provide return. Right, so we don't want to have anything like this. We wish them well. I'm sure they're going to resolve it because they just spend lots of time and talent on just bringing their TMA programs up to better shape, but we want to just take this as a lesson, and we want to just improve, right? And just observing this VTA buses just riding with a 1 person on board, and that 1 person probably is me, then you just think what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope my colleagues' comments have been helpful. I've got a few comments and 1 or 2 questions, and they're kind of all over the map, so I apologize for that. I got to say, one, the mode split survey is extraordinarily helpful. It's some of the best data I've seen on this, and I'm excited to see it year after year. I also, another point, I agree with my colleagues that 100K is a tiny amount. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I'd love to see the city provide you with more money so you can try more ideas. As Commissioner Downing mentioned, the more failures you have, hopefully the more you learn. Wendy, you mentioned pricing on Caltrain is hugely important. Just to illustrate that in my own company, we have maybe 15 people in a company of 100 that take Caltrain, and the Go passes are 180 per year. I pay 190 per month myself. That's ridiculous, and there's no way for my company really to bridge that gap. A few other random things. I'd love to see the TMA, although it's a small section, provide some focus on visitors. Over the past couple of years, I've gotten an increasing feeling and seen a lot of folks that Palo Alto is, oddly enough, a tourist destination. I don't know why people are coming here. So that might be something to address, that if we have visitors, where can the TMA hit them that they might choose transit rather than driving here, even if it's with a rental car. Another idea is, although your focus and your mandate really is to focus on downtown, I would encourage the TMA to consider how your ideas might be implemented citywide. I think it's really important to bake that in from the beginning. To Commissioner Olczyk's point, the peninsula is growing, and at some point in the future, I could very easily see the city expand the TMA to the entire city, at which point it'd be really helpful if from the beginning you're considering how your processes and programs would apply to the whole city, particularly Cal Ave, San Antonio, El Camino. Something I noticed in the data is that lots of part-time retail and hospitality workers who are driving are largely based in the East Bay. And I think there's some social justice implications here. I'm not sure what I'm expecting of this, but I think it's something to focus on, that the mode shares are different based on your work type and your tenure and where you're coming from. That's something to be aware of. And then just one question quickly. I noticed that 40% of Palo Alto to Palo Alto trips are SOV. I'm wondering if there are specific things that the TMA might do to focus on those trips within Palo Alto. I think sometimes in Palo Alto we have the we like to blame our parking and traffic problems on the rest of the Bay Area. I don't think that's a fair thing to do. So I'm wondering if you have any specific solutions that you're thinking of to address folks driving within Palo Alto.
Yeah, I think that just 3 brief comments to respond to you. First of all, we're in preliminary conversations with Town and Country. Okay. So to kind of expand that, I think we're excited about that, but at very early phases. In terms of the social justice comment, speaking as a small business person, mm-hmm. I have a very small team representing currently 14 different zip codes. So, you think about the distances that the team travels just that works for Phil's Coffee, it's significant. So I definitely understand where you're going with that. But yeah, thank you very much for your comments. I really appreciate it.
Okay, and shuttle for the internal folks. Any other questions or comments from the commission? Are we good on this one? Well, thank you all so much. We really appreciate it. Wishing you the best of luck, and feel free to stop on by with any questions or, if you want to talk to us again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, that ends that item. Let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll get to the next item. bring us back to order for our second item, which is a quasi-judicial application for 2515 and 2585 El Camino. This is a request by the Hayes Group Architects for a site and design review of a new mixed-use building. This is a quasi-judicial project, and just for the record, Commissioner Downing has departed us. She's recused herself from this topic based on a sphere of influence or proximity.
Thank you, Cora Silver, Senior Assistant City Attorney. Kate Downing has a leasehold interest in some property close to the project, so she has recused herself.
Okay. And there are two major things for us to consider tonight. One is a record of land use action. You can find the 4 criteria for this on page 5 of the staff report, and then also a conditional use permit to exceed the 5,000 square foot of office for the site. As you may have seen, there was an environmental assessment which included a few mitigations around hazardous contaminants and vapors. With that, I think let's kick it off with a staff report or
disclosures.
Just any disclosures? Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. Margaret Netto, our contract planner, is going to give the presentation for this project.
Good evening, Chair and Planning Commissioners. My name is Margaret Netto, and I'm a senior contract planner here with the city. The project overview, the proposed project would involve demolition of the existing Olive Garden building, which is about 9,694 square feet, and surface parking lot, and construction of a new 3-story, 39,858 square foot mixed-use building, including retail, 13 condominium units, and also office. This is the location map. The project site consists of 2 parcels located on the northeast side of El Camino Real between Sherman and Grant Avenues. The site has 2 zone districts and 2 comprehensive land use designations. The restaurant and its parking are within the CN, the neighborhood commercial zone, and have a neighborhood commercial comprehensive land use designation. A small portion of 2515 El Camino, which is the parking lot in the back, is within the community commercial, and that's the CC2 zone, and has a comprehensive land use designation of regional community commercial. Oh, there it goes. Sorry about that. And this is the site plan, which proposes approximately 10,000 square feet of ground floor retail, 9,000 square feet of office on the 2nd and 3rd floors, and 19,000 square feet of residential condominiums on the 2nd and 3rd floors. Access to the underground and surface parking lot is from Grant and Sherman Avenue. No access will be provided off of El Camino Real. That existing curb cut will be removed. This is the view from Sherman Avenue. The building concept includes a modern design with street-facing building walls meeting the current build-to line regulation, and low planters are proposed on Sherman Avenue. The next slide shows the El Camino Real elevation, and the building concept includes the modern design with street-facing building walls meeting also the current build-to line regulation. Low planters are proposed on Sherman Avenue, on El Camino Real. Tonight, the Commission purview is the site and design process, and this is intended to ensure the development in environmentally sensitive areas will be harmonious with other uses in the vicinity. The Commission shall review the following objectives as noted. Orderly construction and operation. The project is designed to minimize the visual impact of the structure by stepping the building back, providing a plaza area with planters, street trees, and landscaping along the building frontages. The materials and landscaping selection have been designed to complement the building and surroundings and ensure desirability of investment. The project will maintain desirability of investment in the same and adjacent areas, and the proposed design, size, and use of the site are consistent with the zoning and the existing uses on El Camino Real. ensure environmental design and ecological balance observed. Various green building measures have been incorporated into the project, and replacement trees will also be planted. And also, as noted in the staff report, the project does meet the comprehensive plan. I want to highlight some of the zoning compliance topics as noted above. The project includes a request for a conditional use permit to exceed the 5,000 square foot of office for the site by approximately 4,835 square feet. The CN zone does allow for 25% of the site or 5,000 square feet for office use. However, office use may be allowed to exceed the maximum size subject to issuance of a conditional use permit. And I know the staff report noted that this was the purview of the planning director, but this will actually all be bundled together as one approval to the city council. And these findings will be included in the record of land use approval. And also, number 2, this project is subject to the interim ordinance that established a 50,000 square foot annual office limit on R&D. And number 3, this project is subject to the affordable housing requirements, and the applicant is proposing to provide 1 BMR unit, and the fraction will be paid, the fraction thereof will be also paid to the city. And number 4, parking. The project is half of the parking, half of the property is within the California Avenue Parking Assessment District. The parking requirements inside and out of the assessment district have 2 different requirements. The parking will provide 104 spaces, where 108 would be required for parking spaces for mixed use. The applicant requests a shared parking adjustment for 4 of these parking spaces, and then that's less than 4%. An environmental document was prepared, an initial study M&D. The public review period was from January 19th to February 18th, and no comments have been received to date. The next step, this item actually went to the ARB on March 4th, and the ARB did bring up 2 issues at that meeting, and one was to enhance the proposed pedestrian connection between Sherman and Grant Avenue, and they were also concerned with the length of the facade on El Camino Real. So the next steps after, upon recommendation by the Planning Commission, this project will go back to ARB on the 17th, and staff will forward the Commission and ARB recommendations to City Council. And with that, here is the motion, if you choose to do this tonight. And I am here to answer any questions. And also, we have Heather Ivy here from DUDEC if you have any questions on the environmental document. And the applicant is also here for a presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe the applicant gets 15 minutes. Let's make sure it works now.
Thank you, Jody. Good evening, Chair Fine and members of the Commission. My name is Ken Hayes with Hayes Group Architects. I'll be presenting the project on behalf of my client, Victor Lowe, who actually is joining me tonight. I'd also like to point out that I'm joined by Gary Black, our transportation consultant with Hexagon, and Brian Fletcher with Callender and Associates, our landscape architects. Let me just get this position. So the site, as staff just pointed out, is between Sherman and Grant on El Camino, located here. It's almost 40,000 square feet. It is in the CN zone, and there's the one portion that is in this, the CC2 is this little sliver here, where we're proposing some of the parking. It's surrounded by some RM40, some CS across the street, and then more of the CC2 zoning district. This is the site of the Olive Garden. I'm sure you're all familiar with it, but I do have some photos I want to walk through. From the south on El Camino looking north. And then this is from the north on El Camino looking south with the Coronet Motel rather, on the left. And the new Stanford Housing Project directly across the street. And then this is a view looking back towards El Camino on Sherman, and so our site is located here. This is another property there. One of the aspects of the property that we really wanted to capitalize on was connections, creating connections kind of in the California Avenue area and to pull the building into that district. This is the back of the Coronet Hotel. This is Peral Lane. And down there you can see the building on the corner of El Camino and California Avenue, and then just beyond that, the parking garages. There's a deliberate alleyway that sort of bisects this area, and if you turn and look towards our site from that lane, this is a connection that we wanted to strengthen, and over time, hopefully it will become more than what it is today, but I'll show you how we tie into that. The program is to create a new 3-story mixed-use building. Again, as staff explained, we have 13 two-bedroom condominiums. They're 2-story units, about 1,400 square feet. We want to respond to the nature and the forces of the site and the context. Park the project primarily in an underground garage where we have 90 of the cars, and we have 14 cars at grade, and provide some outdoor courtyard space that plays into these connections, balconies, and support sustainable systems. We have some photovoltaic panel arrays and some rain screen siding and high performance windows and mechanical units. So this is the site plan. ARB saw this last week. Just point out we're about 64 feet away from, this is a single family home in an RM40 zone. So we've positioned the building out here. It helps reinforce the street edge as well as the El Camino Real guidelines. 2 entry points here, and this comes into the lot, and you go down the ramp there to the garage, or you can cycle through to the on-grade parking spaces. Multiple entry points all the way around the building. So from the back, from the front, on the ends, we want to be able to get people visually into the building, and then physically with multiple door locations to get into the building easily, so it becomes kind of transparent. The public zone, the sidewalk wraps the building. We do have compliance with the El Camino Real guidelines along El Camino here. And then as that kind of wraps around the Sherman side of the building and gives a little bit more generous space there. The main entry to the upper floors is this yellow area. And then Peral Lane, that force kind of sort of begs for a plaza at this location, and that's why we've developed it there, place for a coffee shop, some kind of outdoor seating area that then gets tied into the downtown or the Cal Ave. This is the blow-up of that site plan. So just to point out, at last week's ARB hearing, they generally are supportive of the project. They would like to see this connection here to Grant along the back of the building from the plaza and from Sherman to be open all the time. And so what we're going to do, we're revising this right now so that instead of this being a controlled entry point for visitors or for the people that live there, it will be a breezeway. So you'll be able to traverse from the plaza along the back of the building to Grant Avenue at any time. The other thing that they had us study, and we're in the process of doing it right now, is the corner here to try to break up the length of the building. We've done a nice job here at this corner, and then the units are sort of in this zone, and they wanted to see something maybe happen at this corner. So we're presently responding to that, and we'll see them again next week. These are the plans of the second floor. This is about 4,800 square feet of office usable here, and then 13 condominiums. This is the first floor of the units. It's the living floor, living room, dining room, kitchen, powder room, generous balconies that are on both sides of the building, including the ones at the ends. So they have lots of outdoor space. An internal stair then takes them to the second floor, where there are 2 additional, 2 bedrooms rather, with more outdoor space off of the master bedroom. These yellow rectangles sort of run down the center of the building, and those are skylights that bring natural light into the the first floor of the condominiums to make that a nice experience. The roof plan here, we have photovoltaic panels, about 30 kilowatt array on the roof. These are the skylights that you see there, and I highlighted it in blue. The ARB comments in 2014, when we were there for a preliminary, they thought, this is the Sherman view, they thought we could probably define the entry a little bit better. They thought that the building maybe was a little too horizontal. They'd like to see a little more height, so we've raised the height of this corner element and changed the orientation of the window fenestration pattern. Along El Camino Real, they sort of said the same thing, try to break this up. And then the main units are here with their balconies, but they felt like it was a little bit too heavy on the retail on the ground floor, and that we probably should try to lighten that up. So what we did was on the El Camino facade, we raised that up about 3 feet, created windows with canopies. The windows, I think, are 10 feet along El Camino. At the corner, we sort of sectioned off with this building reveal the commercial element. So this is the commercial office space. We're using materials that are more reflective of kind of the commercial office or commercial environment for office, and then trying to relate more to the residential with residential, more friendly kind of warm materials. At the Sherman side, we again broke the building apart, created 2 pieces instead of sort of the one, and then defined the entry in the center here with an outdoor balcony that the office space can use at that. And then there's a rhythm of built-in planters that help define the street edge and the courtyard seat wall height, so hopefully places for people to congregate. A little bit small, but this is the street view on El Camino, parking lot here on the Chipotle side, and then the Coronet Hotel or motel located there. And then this is the streetscape on Sherman. There is a new project proposed here since we did this slide, a mixed-use project, not unlike our mixed-use project, but you can see how it sort of transitions to a little bit lower-scale buildings here as our plaza steps the building down. Cross-section through the building, we're about 15 feet floor to floor, so the ground floor retail will be nice retail space. It'll be a concrete structure so that you've got even more expression of height when you're inside. This gives you an idea here of, if I can find the cursor, of how the skylight delivers light down to the main hallway of the units. And then one unit on this side lives to this edge, and then a unit on this side lives to that edge. And then the outdoor space sort of buffers the unit from being right on El Camino. And then this is the cross section at the plaza. So Sherman is here. Gives you an idea. Part of the plaza is covered, actually, so we have a covered seating area, which would be good on days like yesterday. But also the majority of it is uncovered, where we have opportunities for seating and so on. And this was intended to be some kind of a coffee shop, retail, something that would spill out into that outdoor courtyard space to activate it. This is an aerial view from Sherman. We have a unique stair feature that comes from the office space above and delivers people down into the courtyard. We thought that was a nice feature to help, again, activate the courtyard. And then the ARB was interested in this entry, and I told you earlier how we've pulled it apart, created a balcony, and that will now be this entry. And I think I can click that, and it sort of shows you how you come into the entry, the plaza located there. Lots of ground floor windows. There. Did a similar thing on El Camino, where they wanted to see the entry sort of develop better and connected to the plaza. So you can see we've changed the material, recessed it back, have planters, and then this is an arcade that would connect you to the plaza. So there's a physical, visual connection from El Camino along the edge of the building that's on our property. Combined with the sidewalk, it's quite a bit of space on that edge. And then staff already showed you the building view from El Camino. I said earlier, aluminum composite panels, high-performance glazing systems, poured-in-place concrete for the commercial element of the building here to be more expressive, I think, of a commercial occupancy. And then the residential is a rain screen composite wood panel product, as well as a composite material that provides this outline of each of the individual units along El Camino, so they're all uniquely defined. The vocabulary of the building sort of picks up on this mid-century modern idea, and then also uses it on the residential in the same kind of way, but it's used to sort of define the units themselves. This corner here is what the ARB is actually asking us to address right now. And then one of the members of the board also expressed an interest in maybe getting rid of the raised planter here, which we don't need, and perhaps some strip planters between the building and the curb, or the sidewalk and the curb, to create more of a gradual transition to the neighborhood beyond, because it's a little bit more residential like on Grant as you go down Grant. And so we thought that having this planter removed and just plant in grade would be a good solution there. And I think that is it for my presentation, but I'm happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we have one public speaker. Let's do that.
Mr. Robert Moss.
Five minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Fine and Commissioners. I have two major problems with this project. The first one is the office space. Speaking as one of the three people who created the CN zone, we very clearly wanted to limit office space to no more than 5,000 square feet. Not 9,835 square feet, not 5,001 square feet, 5,000, period. The CN zone is supposed to be primarily retail, and the second use would be residential. Office space was supposed to be an afterthought, not the primary reason for building the project. So I'd strongly urge you to reject the request for an additional 4,835 square feet of office space. Convert that to residential. Second, the amount of parking required for offices is not one parking space for 250 square feet. That figure has been obsolete for almost 5 years. More people are jamming into office spaces and taking up less space than they did 10 years ago. A more realistic figure today is between 150 and 175 square feet per worker. That's the number you should be using to assign parking spaces. Now, if you reduce the office space to 5,000 square feet, then you can reduce the number of parking spaces slightly, and we'd be okay. But if we have too much office space and not enough parking, we're going to have real problems, because this part of town has a parking and traffic problem. And we already have problems with people who work in office spaces and retail parking in the residential areas closer to Park Avenue. I have some friends that live there, and they're complaining that if they leave in the morning, they can't park there during the day when they return because the parking spaces are taken up by workers. So reduce the office area and adjust the parking to one space per 150 or 175 square feet for the office space that you finally approved. One other point in the toxics. As you probably know, I'm on the board of the Barron Park Association Foundation, which was given oversight of the toxics in Palo Alto from the Superfund site. This is in what's called the COE area, California Olive Emerson, and it's a Superfund site which is contaminated from the research park, primarily 640 Page Mill. The requirement for sampling indoor air is totally inadequate. In Mountain View, which is overseen by the EPA, indoor air sampling in a mixed-use project requires sampling in the residential area, not just in the garage. Unfortunately, Palo Alto is overseen by the Regional Water Quality Control Board, not EPA, and the Water Board knows an awful lot about water, but nothing about toxics. And so they don't put in adequate restrictions and requirements. So the sampling for air contamination should be done quarterly in the residential area for 5 years. That's what will be required in Mountain View. Lenny Siegel, who's a Mountain View City Council member and is also on the board of the RAB, said he's delighted he lives only half a mile from the toxic site in Mountain View and not in Palo Alto, because in Mountain View he feels safe. In Palo Alto he'd feel in danger because of the poor oversight of the water board. So since it's important to protect people's health and safety, I urge you to require adequate indoor air sampling for anything that's built here.
Thank you very much. With that, let's bring it back to the commission. Actually, my vice chair has just brought up a point. Can staff respond to that one point by Mr. Moss about the toxic sampling in with regards to?
Yeah, I think we can definitely respond to that, but I also want to remind you about giving the applicant a chance for a rebuttal as well to the public comments. But yes, to answer the question on the toxics.
As Mr. Moss mentioned, the requirements that we have included in the mitigation measures for this site are based on the Regional Water Quality Control Board. So these are in line with the standards for this site. If it was in a location in Mountain View or another location that would be monitored by the EPA, the requirements may be different. But in this case, these are in line with the requirements.
Thank you. And then one other question for staff with regards to Mr. Moss's question, or actually point about the parking spot requirement being unreasonable. Is the 250 figure, is that in city code or is that just, yep, okay.
Yes, that's correct.
All right. If the applicant has a rebuttal to any points, otherwise we can bring it back to the commission. Okay. Let's bring it back to the commission. Let's open it up for questions first, and then we'll go into comments. Commissioner Rosenblum.
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions. So there's a comment that the conditional use permit, which is the basis for Mr. Moss's objection to the exceeding of the office square footage, is not part of the PTC's purview unless appealed, and this is an item for the planning director. Is that, so am I to understand that's not part of this meeting?
So there's a reference in our staff report that says that incorrectly states that the conditional use permit is not subject to the Planning Commission, the PTC's purview. And what we have is a history of a policy decision where we actually have required or we have allowed for when multiple applications are being submitted and ultimately one of those is being reviewed by the City Council, we've had this practice of folding all of those discretionary entitlements together and moving that on to the Council for its review. So we would, as Margaret had noted in her presentation, we would suggest that if the Commission does have some comments about the CUP, that we would love to hear that and forward that on to the Council.
So I have a couple other questions, but I'll probably come back to wanting to understand the reason for staff's approval of the CUP or the staff's recommendation to approve the CUP. But my other questions, this one seems small, but there is a small allowance for parking reduction due to mixed use, and it's a 4% reduction. What is the tolerance range normally for mixed use projects for reduction in parking requirements?
It's up to 20%.
Up to 20%, okay. And then finally, how many of the units of the housing is being provided are classified as affordable housing?
That would be 1 unit.
1 unit.
And then the fraction they would pay to the city.
Okay, yeah, because it would be 15% of, okay. Those are all my questions for now.
Commissioner Waldfogel.
Thank you. Let's see. I'd just like to focus or raise two issues and see if there's any interest in further discussion among my colleagues. The first one is that this project is in the CN zone, neighborhood commercial, which is defined as, it includes shopping centers with off-street parking, which I don't think this project is, or a cluster of street front stores that serve the immediate neighborhood. Typical uses include supermarkets, bakeries, drugstores, variety stores, whatever those are, barbershops, restaurants, self-serve laundries, dry cleaners, and hardware stores. So I'm just wondering if there's any interest in discussing whether the format of the retail space and the relationship to the proposed first floor office space really supports this notion of clusters of street front stores. The second topic that I'd also just like to tee up is the housing inventory site table identifies these two sites, 2515 and 2585 El Camino, as accommodating up to 18 units, residential units, and this project proposes 13 residential units, which I think references, is that Comp Plan H2.1? And I'd just like to see if there's any interest in a discussion about whether 13 versus 18 or some other number is the right number, and possibly whether we might invoke, I think it's policy B17, which would allow for some parking adjustments for additional housing as opposed to adjustments for office. So I just want to tee up those two topics.
Thank you, Commissioner. Do we have other lights? Vice Chair?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So yeah, this is a very good point about the 13 units in relationship to the office area. So I'd like to just ask staff this question, just to seek clarification about the comment that my colleague just mentioned. So, what was rationale behind incorporating the specific 13 units versus 18 allowed, and 5,000 plus 3,500 of the office space, as opposed to lower area of the retail space?
So,
what was the project rationale between the balance office versus residential units?
So I think that what you have is you have an applicant who has a proposal in mind, and they come to the city and they submit their request and what they're interested in. I think the commissioners have identified an important policy conversation. There is this ask being made for the additional 5,000 square feet of office. I think it's within the commission's purview, certainly, to review those findings, which we can present to you, because I don't know that it was in the staff report for the conditional use permit. And you have the housing policy that Commissioner Waldfogel had mentioned, and that is an opportunity for you to have that conversation. With respect to the staff assessment, there is an opportunity to request a conditional use permit that is set forth in the code. It is a viable path where one could pursue that. And additionally, we've had some further conversation about it, and it's not reflected in the report, but would be reflected in a matter going to the City Council, and that's an exploration of how we can use TDMs to account for the additional 5,000 square feet of office, so that we can mitigate that to a point where it's been substantially reduced in terms of the traffic and parking considerations. But I mean, it's a great policy conversation that we would like to hear what the commission's view is on that.
Okay, and there was a question from a different angle that may be related to it or might not, but giving some changes that ARB requested and then some verbal explanation that we heard from the applicant. I know that there will be some change in the corner, the opposite corner. How I understand that that area that's now it's filled with that corner unit is going to be moved somewhere else. It wasn't clear from the description what will be the shape of the project after ARB changes that ARB requested recently.
Right. So we don't have. I don't know that the city's received any revised plans since the last week's ARB meeting. I think that would be a good question to ask the applicant to see how their thought process has developed on that issue.
The reason I'm bringing this up, right, because I'd like to understand if eventually we will be, the project that we will be approving or not, how good understanding of this, what we will be subject of the vote, we will have a grasp on, right? So that's, just giving the verbal description, I'm not really sure how that area modification, the corner area modification would impact floor area for retail, office, and other areas of the building.
So, yeah, again, I think that the applicant could probably give you some thought. My guess is that there's not going to be any increase in floor areas. You would be looking at, if anything, reductions, because there, as I understood the conversation, they're looking, as communicated by the applicant, that the ARB is looking for a little bit more articulation or modulation at that corner. So I would not expect a significant change to the building program, and this is an area where the ARB traditionally has spent, that's one of the things that they're looking at. That's not to say that the council or the PTC cannot look at that issue. And then I would just refer you to page, looks like packet page 16, where we have the site and design findings. If you do open it up to the applicant again, if you do want to hear what that, the direction that's going, you can think about that in the context of those findings. But yeah, I hear you. This is, it's evident that there's going to be some design changes to the project. That's going to be different from the project that's before you. I don't know what the extent of those changes are.
Okay, very good. We're gonna, if Chair allows, we're gonna ask applicant the question. But before we do, last question to you. Is it common that, because I don't recall any project that was brought to us in an unfinished form or in the form that's being revised? So I'd like to ask you about clarification of the procedures. Is it proper that to this commission there is a material brought that's under revision? If you could clarify this.
Sure. Well, I can tell you my personal preference is that we got a finished product that is being presented to you. I will say that there is the 50,000 square foot office cap that is, I would say, clearly influencing the scheduling of meetings. Without putting any judgment into whether that's good or bad, that's sort of the circumstance that we find ourselves in, and it's one of the, I would say, consequences of this deadline that we have, and applicants, of course, wanting to take advantage of that process. So, I would express to the commission, to the extent that you feel comfortable reviewing the project, and if you feel comfortable moving forward with modifications or conditions, that's great. But I would also suggest that you're not compelled to act on a project unless a majority of the commission feels like it's ready to act.
Thanks for clarification.
Could we just ask? Commissioner Gardias has a question of the applicant. I'd like to.
Yeah, no, I think it's great to open up the public hearing.
Yeah, open the public hearing again, if Mr. Hayes.
And as Ken comes up, I just, and I know that the commission's aware of this. I mean, this was a project that was originally scheduled for February 10th, and we did have a couple of we didn't have a quorum, so this is the third attempt to have the meeting. So I wouldn't say that it was completely, this isn't necessarily the applicant's fault, and that there was an effort to be here a little bit ago.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So, Mr. Hayes, you heard the question, right? Pretty much. I'd like to understand if those ARB requested modifications, would they result with the floor area decrease in this particular corner, or there will be some balance or just movement of the space?
Right. So to answer your question directly, we would try to balance the area. And so what we're considering, and I actually have a diagram, but it's fairly small. But I'm happy to share that with you if you like. But we're addressing this corner here, as you pointed out, and we're going to handle it in a similar way that we did this, where we created a deep recess and a balcony for the second floor office tenant in this case, and it sort of breaks the building apart so that you kind of read that as a corner element. Then we're going to have the middle part of the building, which will be from this point here, Commissioner Gardias, all the way to here, and then we're going to actually recess this back about 7 feet, create a balcony on, a balcony right here on the second floor. The ground floor pushes back about 3 feet, so that the planter that's there actually gets bigger. So the attempt is to push that element back. I'd say, the net is about 3 feet on the ground floor, about the same on the second floor, except for this sort of reveal in the building that'll push back 7 feet to separate the end unit from the rest of the building. And then the other change would be the breezeway. That's easier to explain. We would take the doors off so the breezeway on the other side of the building was open at all times for people to traverse the site. Materials would be the same, and we would just try to balance the area. Looks like the second floor steps back about 5 feet. I'm happy to show you this.
Yes, please, if you could just circulate among us, I would appreciate this. Thank you.
So I'm sorry, Chair, if we can have the applicant connected to the mic.
Sorry, if you could speak into a mic, even if it's one of our mics.
So thank you for indulging me. On the ground floor, it's the same. We have two concepts here. Both of them are similar on the ground floor. Currently, these columns come down. There's another one here and another one here. We're getting rid of it and pushing this back about 3 feet on the ground floor and extending the planter back to the window line. All right, so it gets about 3 feet deeper. On the second floor, this is the option that we prefer. So the unit used to be out here, just like these units. And so we're essentially pushing it back. That's more like 6 feet back, probably above. So it really sort of steps in at the corner. And then this is that notch I'm talking about that is similar to the notch that's here. Yeah. So this will be a balcony with a door off the kitchen area, and then this is all balcony here. Yeah, so we've put the main balcony on that side. And then the second floor is, again, another small balcony off the master. This is that notch, and then it's pretty straightforward. And then it has the balcony there, and it lines up with the existing side of the building over here. So the biggest change is the pushback, I think, here, and trying to separate that piece off. The reason we have two is that we're not sure which one yet, but we'll have to decide before Monday. And we'll balance the area.
The area would be added on the other side, which shows the other side.
We made this balcony smaller.
Right.
Okay, so no, it doesn't necessarily go over here, but this unit got larger in this direction because the balcony has been made a little bit smaller. So we're trying, it's a play of numbers.
But same square footage on the walls.
That's the objective, yes. Yeah, and we're at the limit on the residential area.
might somebody else think.
Sorry, Commissioner Olczak.
Okay, staff, can you just remind us I know that this is subject to the interim office annual growth limit. Can you remind us the process by which applicants can obtain approval? I remember when we went through this process, there were various options: first come, first serve, or there would be some sort of beauty contest. Can you just highlight for us how that process will work really quickly?
Yes, thank you. So this is the first year that we are entering this process. And what the interim ordinance anticipates is that if the city receives more than 50,000 square feet of office development prior to March 31st, then there will be then the sort of the beauty contest or this development review process will go before the council. And so there are a set of projects that are teed up, and it does look like we are going to achieve this 50,000 square foot threshold. So March 31st is the deadline. Projects need to get all of their lower level approvals, and if they receive those approvals by March 31st, then they can go to the second round of review, which will be by the City Council. The City Council will have a two-step review process. First, they will review the projects just for the overall entitlements. If there are any projects that they think should not be approved, then the council will act on those in the first instance. If after that approval there's still a 50,000 square foot allotment of projects, then the council will apply a further screening criteria. And the screening criteria has been established through an administrative guideline with different criteria and weighting values, and the council will apply that criteria to each one of the projects. And the top-ranked projects will then be allowed to move forward and will be approved.
Okay. As you all know, I'm not a huge fan of that process. I wish it had not been what I will refer to as a beauty contest, because I think it enhances the uncertainty of our application process tremendously. And I think if an applicant's prepared and they apply, well, that time has passed. But, I'll just sort of jump into my comments about this particular project. Big surprise, I'm prepared to support a motion to recommend approval of this project. I'll tell you why. I think an important step in the process for what I will call revitalizing El Camino, what some people might call the Grand Boulevard concept, or whatever you want to call it, is the merging of lots. I don't think that the sort of development we want to see on El Camino can happen without some land accumulation. And so this is an example of two lots sort of coming together. I think one of my fellow commissioners wanted to talk about particularly the CUP and the request for excess office. I would argue that if you took these two lots separately and you said, well, they're entitled to 20% office or 5,000 square feet, you'd find that they could place probably 8,000 square feet of office on their square footage. So when they merge their lots, that 5,000 square foot cap becomes punitive. because if you have a larger lot, you are restricted by a cap. I think that's a mistake. And I think that's the sort of mistake that a CUP is there for. It's precisely there for. Because if we want to encourage the kind of merging of tiny little lots on El Camino so that we can have a little bit more of a cohesive development process, then we have to sort of rely more heavily on that 20% than on that 5,000 square foot cap. So that said, we're looking at a limit, and if you look at the 20% of 8,000, and they're asking for about 1,800 more than that. I'm comfortable with recommending approval for that. I also think that there was a question about our housing element identified the site as 18. Yeah, I'm remembering that correctly. You know, I think that when we consider what the housing element identifies as possible, should be considered as a lens that when we look at a proposed project, anything that's not in excess of that should be considered highly favorable, meaning that if somebody came to the site and said, I want to build 18 residential units, then we shouldn't say, that seems like too many. It's a lot. I think our housing element, I think the process of sort of identifying those lots and suggesting what is the greatest amount of density we can place on them is an exercise for us to sort of meet the state's requirements. But it's also a very lofty goal. And it's, I think, very difficult to determine what the precise ratio is, but I'll sort of suggest that a ground floor residential space on El Camino doesn't really make sense. And so what we're seeing primarily on this project is no ground floor residential, but residential on every other floor, right? We're not seeing office on the second floor.
There is office on the corner.
On the corner. Okay. That's true. There's office on the corner, but it's a separated, in the context of this building, it's sort of separated into two components. And I guess what I'm trying to suggest is this, unless we were willing to sort of revisit the CU process from the perspective of a density and height sort of question, I'm not entirely sure that we could look at their use of the space and say, you know, I really think you should allocate the office that you're using to more housing. I just don't know that that's sort of a realistic suggestion. I also think, you know, it might be helpful to know what it is, what that 15% fee is, right? Right, there's a fee associated with the decision to only create one BMR unit, right?
You know, my understanding was that the applicant was proposing to actually provide, instead of paying a fee, the applicant was proposing to provide 2 on-site BMR units. Has that changed? Or is that not correct? Okay. Okay. One.
So there is
an additional.
So there is a fee, right?
Fee.
So there is a fee. How do we determine what that fee is? I know I'm just curious. Is that based on the permit?
Well, no, so we can, I have that information, I can pull it up, I just don't know it off the top of my head, but it's a fraction. So the requirement of the 15% is, I think, 1.7, if I remember correctly. And so we get the 1 unit, and then the fractional component is paid for in fees that are based on a formula that we have.
Okay.
Okay.
I would just argue that it's nice to know what that number is from our perspective, because I think it creates a little bit of an understanding of the costs of producing low-income housing, just from our perspective.
I believe it's 7% of, 7.5% of the actual sale price of the units.
Okay. Okay. All right. So I guess my, I lost my train of thought there, but I think I've made my points. I guess one of the things that I'm really unclear about is how the process will unfold with respect to the office cap. It's unclear to me whether a project that's seeking office space, will they evaluate a project that's seeking office space in conjunction with the CUP be less appealing than a project that's not seeking any kind of enhanced or conditional use of a greater office space? There's so much uncertainty in this process that I almost think that the debate at this level is redundant, because I have a feeling that when this goes up to council and they go through this two-phase process of review, there'll be just this tremendous debate about, well, which office is the best office and how they will allocate it. So I kind of want to hear what my fellow commissioners think about that too, but that'll be it.
So I would just say, the council did give us some specific criteria in which to evaluate it, and there's I think Carr's looking for it if it's of interest to the commission. But separate or apart from that, I guess I would ask the commission to focus in on what the area that you have purview over, and that's the site and design findings. And I would evaluate the project that's before you, and the council is going to evaluate it in the context of the multitude of projects through the lens that they have. And so your focus here is the site and design findings, the CUP findings, and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you, staff. I would appreciate if staff could send us those administrative guidelines that council is using to projects. That would help us. But Commissioner Olczyk, we could have 100 projects competing for office space, and we'd have to evaluate them all and pass them on to council and do, as you say, the beauty contest. Thank you for your comments. Commissioner Tanaka.
So does staff know for these housing units, are they going to be rental or are they going to be sold? Does staff know?
Yes, they plan on being for sale units.
Okay, they're for sale. Okay. And I was actually going to ask the chair whether we should, I think Commissioner Wolfogo brought up two good points, right? One is, this CN is supposed to be a little bit more retail oriented, right, than perhaps this project is. And also the fact that, I guess there's supposed to be more units of housing than there are. Should we focus the commission on those two topics? Because those seems pretty substantive to the conversation here.
So I think so. I think they are issues we should address in terms of the CN, how the retail is perhaps broken up. In terms of the units of housing, I think it's the perspective that I have, and maybe staff or my colleagues can correct me, is that this site has been designated as it could have up to 18 units. I think all of us on this commission would love to see more housing in Palo Alto in a spot like this, but it really is up to the applicant how many they build. Staff?
And I would just like to clarify too that we do have a maximum FAR limit for the residential units. So I don't know that I think we're up to that maximum with this project. You could have maybe more smaller units, but the square footage would remain the same.
Yeah, that's actually where I'm going on this, is that, for like senior housing, there's certainly a dearth of that. There's a dearth of housing for young professionals. We want to have, more units near transit. This is certainly near transit. So I just wanted to explore that conversation because, do we need more two-bedroom units or do we need more studios, one-bedroom units, right? For senior housing perhaps, right? That's in transit-oriented areas and places that's walkable, right? Does that make more sense, or does it make sense to have like more family-oriented housing that impacts schools already, right? What makes more sense for a project like this, right? So I think the topic that our fellow commissioner brought up is actually a good one to talk about, to see is this, I mean, I know there's a floor area limit, so I'm not saying we should have more residential, but maybe the mix of residential should be smaller units, studios, one bedrooms versus two bedrooms, right? So I just want to bring that topic up. So I'm leaning more in favor of smaller units, because I think the two ends of the spectrum that some of the housing needs is, I think, for young professionals and also for seniors. I think both of them, that's kind of an area of housing need in Palo Alto. It also, in terms of if we're looking for more BMR housing, this is also a way to get more BMR housing, right? So without, a huge impact on schools. So I think that's something that we should consider. I think the second topic, which I think is also a good one, is this the right amount of retail? So given that this is CN zone, I think one of the members of the public brought that up, and so in general, it seems like a good idea. Now, this project still has to be viable, right? Retail may not pay as much rent as office or housing, so that's something that we have to also balance as well. But I'm open to hearing more discussion on those two topics.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Tanaka. The major items I've written down so far, and before I go through my comments and give us another round, are with regards to the CN zoning, what is the breakup of retail and is their overall size correct? With regards to housing, as you were just pointing out, do we as a commission want to encourage smaller units? One issue I'm going to bring up is about the parking and the 4% little exemption there. BMR, it seems like we could put a requirement on there for it to be 2 units rather than 1, and just to pay off for the other, and then issues of the CUP. So I do see other lights, but I'm going to give my comments and questions first, then I'll go back to everyone else. So generally, I think this is a good project. I like the look of it in general, and I'm mostly agree that the record of land use action and the El Camino design guidelines are in order here. The project responds to those. I do have some concerns about specifics, which I'll bring up in a moment. As a few other commissioners have mentioned, there are a few major policy implications, such as the office cap and ground floor retail. I'd like to apologize to the applicant that we couldn't meet earlier. I do regret that, but at the same time, it's not our responsibility on the PTC to hustle projects through. We are supposed to process the city's work in an orderly fashion, considering this building probably has a lifespan of 50 years or longer. So a couple questions for staff. I'll start with the specific ones and get to the broader ones. Commissioner Alchek brought up the point that this project, if it built on the 2 parcels, could have more of a office space. Do we know what the maximum office space would be if it were built as 2 separate projects?
So I think it would be, well, at least be 75, it'd be 5,000. Well, it's 25% of the lot area, and I guess we'd have to figure out that, but you get a minimum of 2,500 square feet. So it's in the neighborhood of, you can just run those numbers on those individual lots, but it's about 9,800 square feet. Okay, so just under 10,000 square feet.
And then with regard to the parking exemption, the 4% at the director's approval, I understand that's generally for a mixed-use project, or if you're doing like sharing with freight delivery, things like that. Is it within the purview of the commission to recommend the director not provide this exemption? Could we do that? I know it's at the director's discretion, but could we make an encouragement or a suggestion?
So I'll we certainly welcome points of view on that. So we would welcome any feedback that you have to offer that, of course, substantiated by, some guidance or some reason behind that. And I would also offer that a project like this, that's going to go to the council anyways.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then my last question would be, we haven't yet really seen a justification for the CUP, and I'm wondering if staff could walk us through that.
So as I recall some earlier conversations, we were kind of on the point that Commissioner Alchek was discussing about the 2 separate lots and how they might be developed independently and yield a similar amount of commercial office space. We also thought that, and it's not incorporated into the staff report, and so we'll need to do that, that there might be ways to mitigate the increase of traffic and parking through some effective TDM program that would require reporting and things along those lines. Additionally, we thought it's a discretionary process, and we would open it up for some public comment, and we're going through that process to learn how that could be affected or modified through that process. So those would have been some of the findings that you would have seen if it were presented to you. But of course, because we were not quite on the same page about whether it was going to be subject to the PTC review or not, that's why it's not included in your packet.
Okay. Thank you. So it's helpful to hear about the two separate lots issue. I'm sure this commission would like to dig into that. I think it's interesting that without that CUP, this project likely would get in under the cap. With it, it's suddenly over. And so we have some issues there, or at least the applicant does. So I'm just going to reiterate the major issues I've seen here. One is on the CN zoning, and as Commissioner Waldfogel has brought up, whether the overall size is correct or whether it's one large pad and it should be broken up. There's also a discussion to be had about housing and whether we want to encourage more but smaller units. Personally, I'm in favor if we do grant the CUP. I'm not sure this project, we should not encourage the director to grant the 4% exemption with regards to Mr. Moss's suggestion that the 250 square foot ratio is perhaps inadequate. And then finally, if there's any discussion about BMR. So I want to pass it back to all my colleagues. The first slide I saw after me, I believe, was Vice Chair.
Yeah, that's correct. But I toggled the switch before we had this discussion. Okay. So I have but nevertheless, the questions I have may be related to this. So if I may ask them, right? There are some of them are not, some of them are. So let me just go through them at one swoop. There are a few of them. So let me just start with page on the plan, with any plan, and I'm just looking at 8.2.1, where there is an office assumed location, that the dotted line where office area on the ground floor is just pretty much just shows that this will be approximate location of the future offices, which I understand that this office could fluctuate anywhere within that area. And my question is like this: is there any restriction for this area, given that front, which is from El Camino side, would be the most desirable retail space? So my expectation would be that that future office location on the ground floor would not expand toward the front along El Camino.
Just to answer the question, I think at the very moment we do not have a condition that would require that office to remain on the back side of the building. We certainly are, open to this discussion and potentially adding a condition related to that. We may also want to open it to the applicant, and they could give us some more information about that.
Yes, so that's number one. Number two, and sorry, I'm going to just ask them all, so then we'll be done with them. So small item, but on page number 3, there is a 7 square feet of the retail space on the 3rd floor. Sorry, I'm just curious.
There are some shared spaces, some hallway spaces, utilities, I believe is the 7 square feet. So it's a shared utility, amongst the whole building. And so we had to split it up in some fashion. And
okay, so it's a technical calculation.
Correct.
Got it. Okay, very good. So now, sorry? Yes. And next question is related to the parking spaces that are calculated on page number 8. So as Bob Moss, Mr. Moss, I'm also concerned with parking effect and potential spillover, given that there would be larger occupancy than the parking requirements. So my first question is like this. First of all, let me share this observation that here we have those two two different areas. One, that's required for the California Avenue Parking Assessment District. The second one is outside of this district, and this is based on that one lot belongs to this district, the other one doesn't belong to this district, which is not real assumption. It's just a technical gimmick, because I don't believe that there is any real distinction between those two. So pretty much those parking requirements of 310 square feet for office for the California Avenue, and then outside 250, it's pure fiction for me. And in reality, there will be more. It is because pretty much, within this area, that would be those distinctions blend pretty much. But then, in addition, so that's number one. In addition, there would be larger occupancy loads in the office area. So I would like to understand what would be the number of the potential occupants in the office area versus that's what's written here, and where would these cars park?
So our regulations don't go by occupancy. We do parking regulations based upon square footage, and I can calculate those in a second here.
Okay, good, thank you.
Commissioner Rosenblum.
Yeah, so I'll just make some comments. So a few things. I do think this is really well aligned with the comp plan and with the zone. This is zoned not only CN, but it's also part of the Cal Ventura Ave mixed use zone, which I think is intended for this. Our comp plan anticipates having denser use, residential use close to transit. That's clearly this area. In terms of a couple of things I would suggest, I would personally like to see more smaller units. And so if this does come down to a beauty contest, so if that's the process we're following, I would hope council would consider projects that have more units to be more beautiful than those with fewer units. On the parking issue, I think I'm out of step with everybody else here. If anything, I'd like to see less parking. This is a mixed-use development. It allows up to 20% reduction. There was a project that came before us where the applicant was proposing reducing 10 parking spaces in exchange for Caltrain passes for all tenants. I thought that was a great proposal. Because of the nature of mixed use, I do think that only 4% reduction seems a little bit odd. You have people coming in and out at different times, and therefore the reduction in parking requirements should be even more than just 4%. But I would prefer it that there was something, because of its proximity to a Caltrain station, that the applicant considered something like this other building where there was an exchange and additional value given to all tenants of the building. Furthermore, I don't see any evidence for a reduction of the 250 square foot metric. It's in our code. I think people like to say this anecdotally. We actually do have surveys now of buildings. When you look at the surveys and look at the number of people that are working in those buildings, look at the number of cars in those buildings, it actually turns out to be the opposite in many cases. So I urge people to actually look at the survey data that was submitted by the large companies downtown that are close to transit. This would also be close to transit. Now, finally, I also agree that the CUP logic isn't totally clear to me. It's not clear to me why there'd be additional office, although I guess the argument that seems most on point is that if this were two separate parcels, it would add up to 9,800, and that is precisely what's being asked. But is that the core of the logic for the granting of the CUP? I'm sorry, this was not the question session. I would say that still feels opaque to me. So to summarize, I'm supportive of the building. I would be supportive with even less parking. I'm not supportive of attempts to add more parking. I question the CUP. And I think this is well aligned with both the comp plan, the zoning, and the general intent of what we're trying to do. I'd like to see more smaller units if possible, and that would make it a more beautiful project.
Thank you. Commissioner Tanaka?
So I generally agree that mixed-use projects generally, because you have non-overlapping uses of parking, kind of makes sense to have less parking. But I think we have to think about the context of where this building is. So this building is actually in the Cal Ave area, which I think for most people that have been there, especially during lunchtime, knows that there's quite a bit of a dearth of parking already. So if there wasn't that kind of parking shortage already, I would generally say, yeah, that's probably okay. But I think what we want to do is we want to have projects that kind of make up for the deficit somewhat. So in terms of a beauty contest, I would say this project becomes even more beautiful by having more parking than less, right? Because this is an area where parking is really needed. And so, and that's why I actually think that we should move more towards like being fully parked than slightly underparked, because of the context of where this building is and the cumulative impacts that are already happening in this area.
Thank you, Commissioner Tanaka. Commissioner Olczak.
You guys are really illustrating my point about the ambiguity of the process when it comes to the beauty pageant with this discussion. I really don't envy any applicant at this point that's suggesting commercial office space. I want to suggest that I found Commissioner Rosenblum's comments very convincing. I think that this mixed use concept is really well suited for this space, for this zone. While I wouldn't suggest a further reduction in parking, because I think the goal should always be to create as many spaces as you possibly can. I'm sure that was the developer's goal, the applicant's goal. But I think there's something to the fact that because this is a mixed use and there may be like different patterns of use, that the quote unquote requirement is that there's room there in what you would suggest the overall requirement is. Sometimes we have a conversation at this dais about Commissioner Guardia's suggestion about maybe restricting whether there can ever be a swap of retail and office. And I think that's, I would prefer we didn't do that. And the reason why is because, number one, the area of this building that's sort of best suited for retail will continue to be retail. The requirement that they have a certain specific number of square feet designated for retail won't change. But determining sort of which sort of space is best suited for retail is a science. It involves understanding the retail consumer and their patterns. And so I think you have to be tremendously familiar with a building and its sort of surrounding area to suggest, and I don't think you're suggesting a change, but I think what you're suggesting is that there should be no flexibility in the decision. And to me, setting in stone inflexibility when it comes to allocation of retail is a mistake. We sometimes don't know. For example, I'll give you a perfect example. There's a courtyard, sort of. I mean, this parking lot creates an internal courtyard, and right now that's the office. In my mind, El Camino is not yet, maybe this particular location is a little better suited, but in my mind, El Camino is not yet at that point where people are just walking down it for blocks. And so in theory, the retail might be very well suited as parking lot facing. And from my perspective, if that occurred to them post-development, that these spaces actually facing the parking lot were a lot better suited for a retail client because they're going to park there anyways and then have to walk around. You get my point. My point is that I think we shouldn't involve ourselves in that sort of nuance. I think we should let the experts sort of lay out their building the way they do. If we have a requirement on the total square footage of space, then I think we enforce that, but not necessarily where it's allocated in the building. And then the only other thing I'd like to suggest is that this was an argument that former Commissioner Keller used to have a lot, which was the size of the units, making them smaller. Look, a 2-bedroom is not half the price of, or double the price of a 1-bedroom in this market. And again, I would argue that without understanding sort of the appeal and utilization of a 1-bedroom in our market, who is that customer? I mean, let's assume for a minute that in every 2-bedroom you have 4 people. That's probably what it would take to afford for any young person, right? So I sort of think that suggesting that we go to 18 single, 1-bedroom units as opposed to the mix of 2-bedroom units is imposing a unsubstantiated conclusion. We don't have the evidence to suggest that that's better for our community. We don't have the evidence to suggest that that would be more appealing to the people that we think we're serving. Don't get me wrong, I would love to see more units. I'm a huge advocate for increasing the housing supply in Palo Alto, and I'm also a huge advocate of low-income housing. If I was a city council member and this beauty contest allowed me to create a preference for a greater number of low-income housing units, I would prefer any project that came with more low-income housing because our community needs it. But that being said, I think it's sort of dangerous to decide what the mix of the unit is without a consultant, without understanding really how that would work. Okay, so those are my comments. I think that when this commission is ready to sort of proceed with a motion, I'd be happy to make it.
Thank you, Commissioner Olczyk. I just wanted to remind everybody that the retail portion of this site is subject to the ground floor retail, so the site will have to maintain the square footage that is currently covered by the Olive Garden. But your point is taken that allow the owner to shift around as they need. Next, I believe, is Commissioner Waldfogel.
Thank you. Question for staff. Since we've put the question of what would be allowed if these were 2 separate parcels on the table, how much retail and how much housing would be allowed on these 2 parcels if they were 2 separate parcels instead of joined?
How much would be allowed?
Yeah, I don't remember whether the FAR formula for housing has some, does it have some base piece that's a higher ratio than the subsequent piece? I just don't remember how the formula plays out. While you're looking at that, the other part of that question is, if the CUP were denied, then would those extra couple thousand feet just go away in this project, or would they be available to be repurposed in some fashion? And I guess the third part of that is, if they would we have the discretion to suggest more housing in that space instead of office?
Well, you'd certainly have the discretion to suggest.
Well, to ask the applicant.
And the additional 5,000, they're not getting an additional 5,000 beyond the base zoning, so that 5,000 could be repurposed.
And what would the zoning require without a CUP?
For use that does not require a CUP, so it could be for more retail. We'd have to take a look at the ratio of the floor ratio requirements for commercial versus residential, which I think is different. I have in my mind that it's 1.0 for commercial and 0.4.
Right, yeah, so I think it's important to just know what the alternatives are, CUP yes or CUP no. And then just the final point, I just want to respond to what my colleague, Commissioner Olczyk, just said about retail, which is, of course, it should be driven by the market, but at the same time, there is a CN requirement for this idea of cluster of street front stores that serve the immediate neighborhood. So we do have to exist within that code framework, and I'm sure we should ensure that whatever use does go onto this site follows that CN format.
Yeah, and I guess to the extent that the site and design findings need to be evaluated to the proposed project design, that's a conversation for the commission to have. The zoning code also sets forth the permitted land uses that are authorized in the zoning code. So if it was one of those permitted or conditionally permitted uses, then it would be approved and consistent.
I mean, would, for example, a bank taking the entire space be a permitted use in the CN district?
So I'm hearing from Jody that it's a CUP for a bank, and also I'm not sure that's...
And a CUP for medical office.
Okay. So medical office and banks require CUP.
Thank you. Vice Chair Gardias.
Thank you. Jody, I think that you were making calculations, so what's the result?
You were asking if the entire property was, had to adhere to the standard parking ratios? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I was asking specifically about office, setting the other retail aside. What would be the but if you did it differently, but my question was, what's the difference between the parking requirement as it is in this handout versus occupancy, versus parking calculated per occupancy requirement?
So we don't have an occupancy requirement, but what's in the code is we do have parking requirements for the California Avenue Assessment District, and we have parking requirements for all of our kind of standard zoning districts. And so this property is sort of, in both kind of half and half, and which is why you see on page 10 of the packet those kind of two different breakdowns of the parking requirement.
Right, and I understand this. I just, I doubt those. I think that I made a comment that this breakdown is artificial because it doesn't mean anything given this development of these two combined lots. But my question was, how many parkings would be in reality, how many cars would be in reality, how many parking spaces would be in reality needed given the occupancy requirements versus parking requirements as depicted in table 2 and 3. There will be a difference of certain number of cars that would have to be parked somewhere between this handout and occupancy.
So if I'm understanding, so I think Jody, just trying to understand the question. There's a parking standard in our code, and you're saying there's going to be an occupancy of this building that's going to exceed that parking standard of the code. Yes. And where are these people going to park?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
So if in fact it is the case that the parking demand for the employees and visitors of the site exceeds the capacity, they would not have sufficient parking on site, and presumably there would be some public street parking that people would avail themselves to, or public parking garages. I believe there was a parking study done for the project, so we can take a look at that, and I believe the applicant's consultant is here to maybe speak to those issues. And I guess if I'm to help provide some guidance to the commission, we would look at I think there's an interesting comment sort of embedded in your question, which has to do with the CalAV parking standards, which is a lower threshold or a lower number of parking spaces are required in that area. So I understand why you're saying it's artificial, but it is what the code has as far as the standard. And it's interesting how the project is laid out in terms of square footage. Depending on where you put that office square footage, you're going to get a different parking ratio.
Right.
So, but I think what might be helpful is maybe hearing from the traffic or parking consultant and learning a little bit more from that traffic report to see if the conclusions of that resonate with you. And if they do, then you would find, or if, I believe the report finds that the amount of parking that's being provided on site is sufficient for the needs. I think you're challenging that conclusion.
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
And then just going to your comment, right? I mean, this is, for now, it is what it is, right? We have this law, so pretty much the applicant meets the regulation requirements. We cannot change it. But for our prospective work, right, we might take a look at this artificial separation because it doesn't clearly work in this example. So we may, in our studies, we may just take a look at this, how truly should be parking allocated between the CalAF assessment district and the adjacent district.
Yes,
right?
I do. Right.
As an additional exercise, right, in the future, right? But then, just, building upon this thought, if we can just open the hearing for a moment, just talk to the parking consultant.
Yeah, well, let's open the public hearing for some questions.
Thank you, Gary Black with Hexagon Transportation Consultants. We did a shared parking analysis is what we did. We did not evaluate whether the city parking code is correct or incorrect, but what we did is we used that parking code, and then we applied the shared parking assumptions that I think you've talked about quite a bit tonight, that because of the mix of uses, which is the parking demand doesn't peak for each one of those uses at the same time. They peak at different times. And therefore, the mix, that's really the logic behind the allowable 20% reduction for mixed-use development. What we did here is we actually put in the actual development that was proposed. We didn't just apply a 20% reduction, but we put in the different uses as they're proposed, and with typical time-of-day factors. Our results showed that we're estimating that the peak demand would be 94 parking spaces. The project is proposing 104 parking spaces. So our report says you have 10 parking spaces more than you need. So it gives you a little, if the city code parking ratio, if you believe it is too low, our analysis says you have 10 extra parking spaces to play with. Thank you.
How many, I'm sorry?
10.
10. Okay, so just just going back to this, what Director Light said, right? That the challenge that I'm having with these numbers, right, is pretty much that when you're going to take 6,677 square feet and divide them over 250 square feet, right? You're gonna get 27 spaces, right? Which is pretty much more by 5 spaces than it's calculated in here, right? So out of those 10, 5 is already filled with this difference, right, between these districts, right? That's half, right? Then, if you're going to take retail, then probably there will be another half, right? So I'm already at the limit that you're saying that you have built in as the buffer zone, right? But I can just say further, right? And I can go to Mr. Moss's argument and say, look, in reality, this number 240 is not real one, and maybe it's like what? It's 200, and then you're gonna just end up with 20 cars that have to be parked somewhere. And my question is, how are you gonna mitigate that, right? That will be reality. So,
staff.
If I may clarify, if we use the standard parking ratios across the entire project, so that would be office at 1 per 250, that would be 39 some odd spaces. Retail at 1 per 200 be 50 some odd spaces, plus the 28 for residential. That would give you a grand total of 118, and there is 104 being provided.
Thank you.
Thank you. So just to make it clear for the record and for anybody who might still be watching on TV, we're talking about how if you shift the office inside or outside of the California Avenue Parking Assessment District, those numbers might change. I think my opinion here is that this is just an artifact that this boundary kind of crosses the site. I believe it's our duty, wherever the office is allocated, the project should meet those parking standards as set out in our code. I'm not sure I would be in favor of raising the parking to 118 just because if we assume we can extend the district to the whole site.
Right, but when we settled on the numbers, right? So that was the first part of this exercise. So now the question to the applicant is that that one way or the other, you're gonna, and I understand you're meeting the zoning requirements. I'm fine with this, but reality will be like this: that you will be having truly more cars that would be brought to the site. So, what is the mitigation item in the project in terms of some TDM or some other program that would just take those cars off the street or off the, parking spaces?
Let me just comment that the numbers that we calculated assume no TDM plan whatsoever. So to the extent that the applicant is willing to commit to a TDM plan, I think we could take some reductions off that parking, as you suggest.
Thank you. Commissioner Rosenblum?
Yeah, I just want the record to reflect that we're kind of making up numbers around occupancy and just saying, well, it might be one person per 100 feet, or it might be 200, and therefore these numbers are wrong. We do actually have surveys on this. So we had 5 companies in the downtown area submit their own data, plus we have now business registry data, but I've just pulled up the one from last year. There, between 3 companies that submitted together, which is Palantir, A9, SurveyMonkey, there was 228 square feet of office per head, so indeed lower than 250, but their mode share was such that they had 0.37 cars per employee, so the number of square feet per parking space was 434. Now, no one's suggesting that we should use that number and reduce dramatically the number of parking spaces. I'm saying instead of making up numbers, we have numbers. And the city also has standards on this. So I just think it's a bit of a distraction, but for the record, the numbers that we have don't support the notion that 250 is an arbitrarily high figure. And you know, I just think it's a bit of a distraction. It's misleading to suggest that that's common wisdom.
Thank you. I appreciate that comment, and I think I agree that even if we think 250 is too low or too high, I tend to agree with you, it's probably too low. We have the standards in the code currently. So I just want to remind everybody, it's a little bit past 9 o'clock. We have talked, I just want to, before I pass it to Commissioner Waldvogel, some of the issues I see that we want to get into is there's this parking issue. Maybe we've resolved it here. There is still the issue of the CN zone and whether the retail should be on the street front and multiple shops. I think it seems there's some appetite on the commission to encourage more and smaller units, even if we don't make that part of the conditions of approval. And then the big issue I still see that we haven't really addressed is whether we recommend approval of the CUP or not. Commissioner Waldvogel.
I'd just quickly like to comment on Commissioner Rosenblum's point, which is we just looked at the TMA studies that showed that the large companies have higher transit use, but smaller companies, which are the likely office tenants in this building with only, around 10,000 square feet, are less likely to, or are more likely to have single occupant vehicles. So I think it's a bit deceptive to believe that the Palantir results will apply to the tenants in this building. I mean, we just don't know, is the bottom line. We just don't know. And so I agree with Chair Fine's point that we should just abide by the code standards. We really don't have anything else to go on.
All right. I'd like to push us to make a motion, and I'm not going to make it sorry. Okay, one more question.
I want to just make sure that we that this parking item will be somehow addressed, right? So, just going back to the applicant and your parking person. So you're gonna revise the numbers. We have an agreement that you're gonna revise the number to show the number of the cars that would be parked under lower parking requirements scenario for the entire building. And this will be additional calculation, because this calculation that's on page 8 meets, of course, code requirements, but then reality calculations should be also added to this package and then presented to the council as the set of the numbers that would be more real. So
I think, Vice Chair, that your concern here is valid, that there is this issue of shifting the office space. And I think that's an important one for us to highlight to council in terms of the fact that this parking could be built today with the office on this side, and they could shift the office over and suddenly the demand is different. But I think that's a bit of an artifact given where the current CalAV parking assessment district falls. You're welcome to make a motion around that. I'm not sure if it will be supported. That's up to my fellow commissioners. Staff, looks like you are hoping to say something? Oh, excellent. Me too. All right. I don't see any more lights at the moment, so I'm going to encourage us to make a motion. I'm not going to make it myself at the moment, but just to sketch it out, I think it would be an approval of the record of land use action. Correct me if I'm wrong, though. It doesn't seem like we have enough justification to approve the CUP, but if you disagree, please let me know. We'd also like to make a recommendation to encourage more and smaller units. There's the note of the parking issues in terms of the parking assessment district. And then we still have to deal with the fact about the retail on the street front and multiple shops. That could be a requirement or just a suggestion. Commissioner Olczyk.
Okay, so I would like to make a motion that we recommend to the City Council the approval of the mitigated negative declaration and the record of land use action approving site and design review to allow construction of this project. I also would like to include recommendation, I guess that's included. That includes the CUP, right?
So actually our draft record of land use action does not have the CUP findings on there, so the motion would be to include that if that's the direction that you're going.
Yeah, I would
Okay.
like to
With
my
some
motion.
supporting information.
I'd like my motion to include recommendation that the CUP be granted. Do I need to make those findings in my motion, or are we okay?
Yeah, I think we, if there are, I guess if there's a second for that, then maybe during the deliberation we can expand on the findings.
I second that.
All right, so the motion on the floor by Commissioner Olczyk is that we recommend approval of the mitigated negative declaration, the record of land use action, and we include the approval of the CUP, as seconded by Commissioner Rosenblum.
And so before you vote, if I can.
Oh, no, we're going to discuss it first, I think.
Okay, so great. So then can I just put on the record what the findings are so that you have that
Sure.
for your deliberation?
Thank you.
Okay. So there are two findings for the CUP. And they read as follows. That the proposed, that the CUP would not be detrimental or injurious to property or improvements in the vicinity and will not be detrimental to the public health, safety, general welfare, or convenience. And the second finding is that it be located and conducted in a manner in accord with the Palo Alto Comprehensive Plan and the purpose of this title, the zoning title.
Thank you. Okay, so I have a few amendments I'd like to suggest, but I want to let the speaker and the seconder, the mover and the seconder speak to their motion.
Okay. Would you like me to make the findings? To suggest why the findings are made?
If that's what you
No,
want.
I'm asking my seconder. Would you like me to take on that?
Go ahead.
Okay. I think I think that I think I've made the case where I think this project is worth is worth recommending for approval. I will identify why I think the findings for the CUP are met. I don't think that this is I think we meet the first finding very easily. I don't think this is injurious to the parcels or properties in the nearby vicinity. I think more importantly, I think this is in line with our comprehensive plan and also the sort of guidelines that define the specific area, in that when we encourage sort of the development that we want to see there, and I made this point earlier about merging parcels, what we're really allowing them to do in terms of the office space with the CUP is achieve a very similar result that they theoretically could have achieved with a much less efficient use of space. Had they divided this parcel into two, and then it would have resulted in probably significantly less residential, significantly less retail. Well, I don't know exactly how that would work, but I think what we're doing here is we're, in effect, achieving compliance with our comprehensive plan by allowing this site to effectively achieve its office utilization that I believe the comprehensive plan and the guidelines for this specific area are suggesting are what they want. So it might be a little convoluted, but I think that's why it meets the CUP findings.
Commissioner Rosenblum?
Yeah, that to me, the CUP was the piece that I was most unsure about. I find the argument that A, if it was two parcels, it would be entitled to almost precisely the same square footage. And so now combine the two parcels, which I also think is well aligned with the goals of both the El Camino plan and our comprehensive plan and this zone. I find that compelling. So combining these kinds of parcels, I think, is useful for the achievement of the goal of both El Camino and the trans-oriented areas.
Thank you very much. I see one light from the Vice Chair.
Yes, I'd like to make an amendment, if I may. So I'd like to propose a friendly amendment to to include these two following requirements. Number one, that office space. Let me say it differently. That retail space along El Camino, that retail space along Camino, space along El Camino would be restricted only to retail space. That's number one. Number two is that the applicant will provide or council will receive calculations for in addition to the parking calculations on page 8, will receive calculations for the entire parking requirements per lower ratios for office and retail, and applicant will provide mitigation plan for the overage of the parking spaces that would this delta would result with.
Is there a second for this motion? I actually saw this amendment, three parts.
I don't think that's how it works.
So it goes to you guys. Sorry, my mistake.
Yeah. So I don't accept either of those amendments as friendly to my motion.
All right. So I believe, Vice Chair, that this data about the entire parking requirement and finding the delta and providing mitigations is something we could individually write to council about as an important issue. It seems to be one you find very important, and we appreciate that. There may be something to the requirement about retail along El Camino, or the space along El Camino be devoted to retail. I don't know if there's any interest in a friendly amendment just around that. Okay. Commissioner Tanaka.
Yeah, so I'd like to make a friendly amendment. The amendment is that there be smaller, more units in this development. I think what Fogo recommended, or I forgot the thing you cited, but it was 18 units. So, how's that? Housing inventory, yes.
Okay, so I think, at least from my perspective, I would need a little clarification from what you're suggesting. Are you suggesting that approval be recommended only if the unit mix was different than 13? Or are you suggesting that we recommend approval of this site, but would encourage council to consider potentially a slightly different unit mix? Are you suggesting you would only approve this if the unit mix, you would only recommend approval if the unit mix was greater than 13? Or are you suggesting that you would recommend approval, but you want council to consider that we think that a greater number of units is prudent? That's what I'm trying to understand.
Okay, well, I think whatever we say is recommendations, right? So
I know, but I'm wondering if, assuming council sees the minutes of this conversation and they understand that there's some discussion here and there's some support for this idea of potentially a different unit mix, what I want to understand is if the unit mix didn't change, would you suggest council deny this project? Because if that's what you're suggesting, then it informs, I'm trying to understand your amendment.
Sure, yeah. So my amendment is that unit mix be 18.
Okay, well, I can't accept that amendment either, as a friendly amendment.
Through the chair, if I could help out a little bit on this issue. So, our code does not talk about unit size per se. It talks about overall FAR, of course, and then there are some housing element policies that talk about number of units for this particular site. And so I think it is important to, explore this issue in the context of the housing element that does require, or that anticipates a higher number of units than is being proposed. Also in the context of the site and design findings, you may want to see a higher density, smaller units, may be more appropriate for this site if you can try to fold it into those findings, or if you can try to fold it into the conditional use permit findings, or maybe, deny the conditional use permit, but suggest that there be some additional permitted use that goes into that space, such as housing. And that would, since it looks like they're already at the FAR unit for housing, you would have to decrease the size of some of the other housing units to allow for the permitted use. So there are some thoughts to consider.
Thank you. Commissioner Tanaka, would you like to reframe your amendment? Or?
Okay, so I think for site design reasons, I think for CUP reasons, I think for the fact that there's more housing stock needed for young professionals and seniors, school impacts, many other reasons, I think that this project should meet the housing element, the housing inventory. Is it housing inventory? And that should be 18. So that's my friendly amendment. If you don't accept it, which I think you don't, then it's an unfriendly amendment, and so I need a second on that.
Okay, so with the utmost respect, I do not accept that as a friendly amendment.
There is an unfriendly amendment on the floor. I'm willing to support it. Willing to second that.
Can I make, just as the second
Please.
of the First Amendment, just to
Please.
So with respect, I actually think the mechanism is to pass to council the recommendation that they see this project as less attractive because it has fewer units, and it's up to the applicant to try to find a way to increase the number of units, rather than us dictating the number of units that we would approve it at. That would be my view. That would be something I would support as a signer on to the Alcheck proposal.
So
I just don't think we can dictate the number of units, is what I'm saying.
So I understood the unfriendly amendment at this point to be an encouragement, since we cannot dictate it. Or are you placing it as a requirement? I'm sorry if I misunderstood.
Yeah, so I believe for this site, given the comp plan, given the housing inventory, that a higher number of housing units is warranted on this site.
I completely agree. I think, though, it's going to be an encouragement or suggestion, rather, unless you want to make a requirement.
These are all recommendations.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, as I see it then, what we have now is a movement to approve the record of land use action, including the CUP, but also recommend that the project have a mix of 18 units. Yes.
Just so we're clear, all the units, how many, just so we're clear, how many of the units are 2-bedroom?
7, I think. No,
There's 13? So in theory, there are 26 bedrooms? And we're suggesting we would prefer an allocation where there was only 18 bedrooms?
So there's 7 2-bedrooms and there's 4 1-bedrooms. So 14 and 4, 18 bedrooms.
There's currently 18.
Proposed.
And what we're suggesting is that anything that we would support, what we're suggesting here is that we feel, this amendment is suggesting that the housing should have 18 units. Okay.
And so, Chair.
My preference for this process is that we have the motion on the table. I haven't accepted that friendly amendment. I would rather we take a vote on the motion, and then they can have a vote on the unfriendly amendment, and if there's support for that unfriendly amendment, then it moves up. I think we should go through the process like as laid out for us.
All right.
If there's more amendments, then we should go through that process.
I agree. We've had lots of opportunity to comment. And I think it will be clear to council the issues that we have around the 18 units, around the parking issues that may result, around retail on El Camino. Those seem to be the big 3 we've highlighted. Assistant Director.
So I'm just, as I'm hearing the dialogue, I got to just share an area that gives me some discomfort.
Sure.
So I appreciate the, I guess what I'm hearing is that the current project that's being, for the unfriendly amendment conversation about wanting 18 units, what I'm hearing is that the current proposal that's before you, those that might support that, the finding that the Commission may be struggling with is one of the site and design findings that say that this project is consistent with the Palo Alto Comprehensive Plan, and your site for that would be the housing element, and I think it's Housing Program 2.1, and that's fine. My concern would be that if you're asking for a redesign, I would be concerned that you're asking for 5 more units. I don't know what that's going to look like in terms of the building, what that's going to do for the parking mix, and there's a lot of uncertainty into what that project now looks like. And for me, I think that's fine if the Commission wants to head down that direction, but that's a continuation for the applicant to go back and study those issues so that we can present to you a project that responds to that, should the applicant be interested in pursuing that. So I'm uncomfortable with let's add 5 more units and send it off to council because I think there's some unfinished work there.
I hear you. Thank you. Okay, so I'd like to thank my colleagues for all our work here. It seems like we are maybe ready to proceed with a clean motion, which I'll restate in a moment. And then I'd like to take a vote. Vice Chair? I'm being too generous with you all.
In terms of the clean, I'd like to just offer or propose unfriendly amendment for the second item that I was proposing before to.
So I'm sorry, Vice Chair, we're losing track here. So we have a motion. We have one friendly amendment that was failed. We had a second friendly amendment that failed. Now we have an unfriendly amendment. I think that has been offered, and I believe you.
We are not going forward with it. So right now, as I'm recording, the motion on the floor was Commissioner Olczyk's original motion to approve the mitigated negative declaration, the record of land use action, and the CUP. It's a clean motion, along with the findings for the CUP.
I'm sorry, wasn't there an unfriendly amendment and a second?
Yes.
So that should be voted on first.
Somebody was
Okay.
Yeah, there should be vote.
Am I allowed to withdraw my support for that one and then take it off the floor?
Yes.
I'll do that. So it's back to the original motion. Thank you.
So can I continue?
Vice Chair, please continue.
Okay, so pretty much unfriendly amendment would be to provide calculations and mitigation measures for excess parking.
All right, there is a amendment on the floor from Vice Chair Gardias. Is there a second for that? Doesn't seem like it. We're back still with the clean motion from Commissioner Olczyk. This is the last light I have, Commissioner Waldfogel.
Let me just explore one other option on housing, which is to leave the housing, the 13 units as proposed, but as an alternative to the office CUP, to replace the second floor office with some number of additional housing. And I don't know if we know what format that would be, whether it would be 2 units, 3 units, something. And if that requires a variance of some sort, then we would be recommending that variance. So I just want to explore if that is a.
Okay. So I'll just say that again. I think the reason why I think that's an unfriendly amendment. I think the reason why I will deem that an unfriendly amendment is because there are issues related to the maximum FAR of residential that I think somehow we're ignoring in this conversation. And so if the 13-unit mix is exactly the same, then what you're suggesting is a CUP they haven't asked for, which hasn't been studied and hasn't been evaluated. And then that could change the parking allocation. There's just so many variables in what you're suggesting. My preference is that, and I hope my seconder agrees here, that we don't accept that as a friendly amendment. And I have full faith that council will see this deliberation as an indication of our amazing support for greater housing units in all projects in Palo Alto. But I don't know that we're doing ourselves any justice here by involving so many involved suggestions. So,
Thank you, Commissioner Olczyk. Commissioner Waldfogel, is that an amendment you'd like to make?
Yes, and I just want to make one other point relative to this, which is that in half of our deliberation, we're giving the applicant credit for joining parcels together, and the other half, we're ignoring that. So, for example, the retail that the entire project is offering is a replacement for the retail that was on one of the 2 parcels. So if these parcels were not joined, there would be more retail here. So it just seems to me that we can't deliberate part of the time as if this should be 2 projects and part of the time as if it should be 1.
So to answer that, they are required to preserve the existing ground floor retail, which is 9,000 something square feet. They're not required to build over it. Seems like that's what they're doing.
But if the parcels weren't joined, there would be 9,000 on the one side, and then there would be.
But there's no retail. There's no retail there, so they're not required to build it or retain it, as far as I understand. All right, folks, let's focus. So we have a motion on the floor to approve recommendation of the mitigated negative declaration, the record of land use action, and include approval of the CUP based on the findings that the CUP is not detrimental to property or public safety, and that it is in accordance with the comp plan. We have gone over a number of things I think council will hear loud and clear, and if we like, we can write. One moment, please.
I think you should allow I think you should allow him to suggest an unfriendly amendment, though. If I didn't accept his friendly, so he has that opportunity.
I'm not sure at this moment. You are welcome to, Commissioner Waldfogel. I'm not sure there will be the support for it at the moment. I'll leave it to you, but otherwise, I think we're ready for a vote.
I'm not hearing overwhelming support, so let's go.
Okay. So, motion on the floor, as proposed by Commissioner Olczyk, and with the findings for the CUP. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3. Those opposed? 1, 2, 3. We're split. Should we maybe take a 5-minute break?
Sure.
And then come back to this? let's get back to this and see if we can finish this off tonight. Thank you all for your patience. I'm going to go over first a couple options that we could do that maybe could get some consensus here. So one, with regards to the housing, we could make a suggestion to council that they look at ways to maximize the housing on this site in accordance with the comp plan. We could also make a requirement of the approval be that there be another BMR unit or something of sort. Sorry,
we couldn't require that, but it's a suggestion.
Suggestion for condition of approval to council. With regards to the parking issues that Vice Chair Gardias has brought up, staff has said they will include those numbers based on the lower parking requirement thresholds in the report to council. We could also encourage the project or make a suggestion for a requirement that the project either join the TMA, do a TDM plan, require van pools or carpools for the office space, and that would be linked to the CUP. So I want to leave it open to the floor for any motions. Let's try to do motions rather than just discussion. We've had a lot of time for that. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for binding up this option. So I'm going to make a motion. The motion would be just to approve the project as it was presented with suggestion to the council that to increase number of the units and also to with the requirement to for the applicant to join TDM program for additional or for overage parking spaces per calculation per lower ratio.
Is there a second for that? And I will note you've not included the CUP as the current boilerplate motion does not include the CUP. Would you like to include approval of the CUP with its findings?
Yes.
Okay. So let me just type this out. So the motion as proposed by the Vice Chair is to approve the negative mitigated declaration, the record of land use action, and the CUP along with its findings. In addition, we make a suggestion to council to increase the number of units on the site and also a suggestion that the applicant join the TDM for the parking spaces that are in overage, as staff understands the overage being the difference between the in-district versus out-of-district area. Is there a second? Commissioner Tanaka.
I'll second it.
Seconded by Commissioner Tanaka. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Thank you. Yes, so I think that this is a reasonable compromise between different voices and also respect to those that were proposing other solutions on this floor. And for this reason, I think that's the best vote that we can have on the floor.
Thank you. Commissioner Tanaka, would you like to speak to this?
So I think we all know Cal Ave is already impacted by a parking shortage, so I think the suggestion about parking makes sense, and I think I've spoken a lot already about the more units, so I don't think I need to do that.
Thank you very much. Let's do this as a vote. So the motion, just to restate it, is to recommend approval of the project, including the mitigated negative declaration, the record of land use action, the CUP, along with its findings, and that council consider ways to increase the number of units on the site, and also we suggest that council require the applicant to join a TDM for the overage parking spaces. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, look at that, unanimous. That's all of us in favor. So I believe that item is concluded. Thank you all for your patience. I'm sorry this was a little confusing and troublesome. A lot of that's on me. Okay, That item is done. I don't believe we have any approval of minutes, actually. Nope. As far as committee reports, just one quick thing. The CAC is beginning to look at land use next week. So if you are interested, that's a really big one. Please show up. You're welcome to make comments, or you can submit them to the CAC itself. And with that, unless there are any other reports or comments or questions from my fellow commissioners, I don't believe there are. Thank you all so much. It's 9:50. This meeting is adjourned.